Good afternoon. This is the Budget and Finance Public Safety Committee joint meeting and a special meeting of the Los Angeles City Council. Two items on the agenda, number 2 and 3, are the joint meeting items, and we will have a quorum of both committees here present today, and so we have Mr. Mr. Koretz, Mr. Weezar, who's on both committees, right? On just budget. Mr. Koretz is on both committees. Mr. Reyes on public safety, and also Mr. Smith, who's on both committees. Myself, Bernard Parks, is chair, budget and finance. Oh, not on public safety. Okay. Where's Zion? Okay, Mr. Zion. And then also Mr. Cardenas is joining us. So we should have a quorum of both committees. And so we will start off with the agenda for item 2 and 3 so that we can address those two issues that were referred to the joint committee from council recently. And maybe where we can start off with is staff come up in the CAO and the CLA to give the committees an overview of our current budget issues as it relates to hiring, and also I understand we have a recent report from the Personnel Department that talks about their attrition that was dated October the 2nd, and so we've had Personnel Department also present. We'd like to get them to come up at this time. We do not have any public comments on item 2 and 3. Oh, okay. All right. While we're waiting for staff to come up, let me go through the two public comments, and you could make those at this time. If both of you would come up to the podium, Mary Benson and Nina Royal.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Mary Benson, and I am a resident of Council District 2. We have no council member right now. And in your considerations this afternoon for the furloughing and possible diminishing of our emergency services, please keep in mind that the station fire and fires from last year have created a substantial emergency potential with a condition known as mud flows. And as you proceed, be aware that our neighborhoods in the north end of the San Fernando Valley, both Council Districts 12, 7, and 2, are in dire need of a coordinated emergency management plan as a result of rainfall this year and this winter. Thank you.
Thank you. And also, Ms. Royal's coming up. We also have a card of Monica Harmon.
Good afternoon. My name is Nina Royal. I am Vice President of the Sunland Tujunga Neighborhood Council and on the board of Saving LA Project. I implore you, please, do not let the size of our LAPD go back to 1993 status. You will endanger all the lives in the city of Los Angeles. I can say to you that I have myself experienced major violent crime, and I don't want to see this happen to anyone. I am for a balanced budget, and I believe everyone should feel the pain of when the stock market goes down. Everybody's prices, everybody's share of the market goes down. We should not be subsidizing anybody's pension plans because of the fact that the market went down and the city has to bring it up to speed. So with that in mind, I hope that you will find another way rather than furloughing police officers, and please stop. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. If you read all the websites, the nation is watching Los Angeles. They're going to see what you're going to do with our premier police department, LAPD. you're either going to destroy 7 years of hard work and the momentum we have in recruiting officers, or you're going to do the right thing and what you promised the residents of Los Angeles with the trash fee hike. The Daily News had a great opinion piece agreeing with many of us that if you're not going to use that money, it needs to be given back. But not only that, you've compounded the problem because of your irresponsibility with 1,000 medical marijuana places. And what's happening now, you read the news, they're becoming targets for robberies and gangs. And if you don't think that gangbangers are looking at the news, waiting to see what you're going to do, you need to think again, because they're pretty dumb and they're cowards, but they're smart cowards to know where our officers go. So please reconsider furloughing our officers and continue hiring. Thank you.
And also, we have Teresa Marquez. Oh, there we go. Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Marquez, and I'm from Boyle Heights, District 14. And Mr. Smith, we had a discussion about this before. The approval of the trash collection was for the police, okay? There's a motion, Mr. Smith, that you need to look at. I'm not going to sit here and argue with you, and I would like for you to stop your body language in order for me to continue speaking. One of the things is that our police are trained. Look at how long it takes, the expense to train our policemen. They are dedicated. And for us to let them go, it's going to be a loss of revenue for us too. The other thing is, they want to let 30,000 prisoners out. Where are they going to go? LA. And where's our policemen if you're going to let them go? Please, try to keep as many policemen as we can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have the staff come up, and we're now joined.
Well, the staff come up for Ms. Benson. I appreciate very much what you had to say about the fires. Just for your information, there's a Chief Storms, perfect name, with the LA Fire Department, who is working with Caltech. They did it after the fires last year in District 7 and 12 to determine from the nature of the fire, the heat of the fire, the path of the fire, where we will have potential flood problems. And they actually have worked out this magnificent program, and they are working on that. So I just wanted you to, if you please tell the people of the neighborhood council that the department is working on that. You may request, if you can get a hold of Chief Storms, for him to come out and meet with you and explain to you what they're doing on that, so that your neighborhood council is fully aware of what's going to happen in the San Tahunga area. And we did this last year, and through that process, we were able to notify our neighborhood councils in the affected areas where we needed to get sandbagging done. And it was a great process. It worked very well. So Chief Storms is his name, LA Fire Department.
Okay, if we could have Miguel start off the report. And also, do we have a representative from Personnel Department?
What item would you like us to start with, sir?
Yeah, we're going to merge items 2 and 3 as to one subject.
Related to police hiring?
That's right.
Well, it's my understanding that the October class, notices for the October class went out last week, and we could certainly get more information from that from the department. I could speak on where we're at with the rest of the city family once we get to that portion of the meeting.
Okay. The one thing I would like maybe to start off and give us an overview of, in the sense of the current budget and what the impact in the sense of dollars as relates to hiring each class, and where we currently are from the CAO's perspective in our 09-10 hiring plan.
Well, from the CAO's perspective, you know, the budget assumed a certain level of hiring, and the city continues on that path to hire according to what our budget had allocated when it was approved. In identifying solutions to our $405 million shortfall, our focus has been on identifying solutions working with the various labor units, including the PPL, to identify how we're going to mitigate that shortfall. It has not assumed any change to the hiring plan.
Okay. And just so everybody's aware, public, what was the number proposed to hire to attrition?
40 DP. Go ahead. You want to?
Pardon?
480, sir.
480?
Yes.
And that was, if I remember, 12 40-person classes?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we were going to take off December, so it was 12 40-person classes.
Okay. And then with that 480, it was dependent strictly on the number of people that were leaving the department during this 12-month period?
Actually, it's averaged over the year. So we would look at, what we were doing was hiring an average of 40 per month, no matter what the attrition was, and then watching the numbers, because we can have bubbles up and we can have bubbles down. Right now, we have a bubble up because people aren't attriting out at the rate that we anticipated they would, but we have to watch it during the year because we could have a bubble down, too.
And when you said that your plan was to hire 40 per class for 12 classes, no matter what the attrition was, or was that to be adjusted depending on attrition?
No matter what the attrition was is the wrong term. I shouldn't use that. We are watching the attrition, and although the attrition is a little bit lower than a lot lower than what we anticipated at the beginning of the year, it can bubble up on us after a contract gets into place, depending on what the results of that contract is. So we have to watch it all year long, and what we're doing is hiring an average of 40 through the year, and then if the attrition doesn't catch up soon with our hiring, we will have to adjust our hiring.
Okay. And when you say catch up soon, what is the timeline to make that assessment?
Well, we are watching the attrition every month. It hasn't caught up yet, but again, we don't have a contract in place. We believe that whatever contract gets put into place may have some kind of effect, one way or the other, on our attrition. So we're going to watch that and make sure that in time before the year ends, we will end at the 480 level if that was our attrition. If it wasn't, then we'll end at the attrition number. We will not go over.
Okay. And then on dealing with the current numbers, right now you've sent out the class for October, so there's one scheduled for November, none December, then the 6 months in the next fiscal year, or next calendar year.
That was the plan, sir.
Okay. All right. And then let me ask personnel, you gave us a report as of October the 2nd that kind of gave a historical perspective on police hiring?
As of today, we've hired 159 recruits. That's for 4 classes. And so basically we are on target as far as our attrition. As far as our attrition is concerned, we are meeting our hiring goals. And again, as Rhonda did state, we meet regularly to see where we are with attrition. But we have 1 class of 39 and 3 additional classes of 40 that we've hired thus far.
Okay. And as of the October 14th class, understanding what attrition has been since July 1st, where are we on the hiring plan? Are we over or under?
We have attrited out 117 and hired 159, so we are slightly over.
Okay. What number is slightly?
40. Yeah. 42 over our actual attrition and 62 over where we had planned. We project out well before the budget is put into place. We project out how many people we think are going to leave and when we think they're going to leave. We're 62 under that number, and we are 42 over.
You're 62 under in attrition, but 42
from what we projected.
Okay, but 42 over in hiring.
But as far as the actual attrition, people who actually left and people we actually hired, we're 42 over.
Okay. So you projected more attrition than occurred, but the hiring has stayed steady.
Yes, and the reason why is because at the beginning of the fiscal year, we normally have big numbers that retire or attrit out during that period because a contract has been in place for a year and a person has gained their COLA for a year and they go and retire. Well, there was no contract this year, so people are
historically,
hanging on.
what is your major retirement period?
The first and the fourth quarters are our biggest retirement periods
First and fourth quarter of the fiscal or calendar year?
of the fiscal year.
Okay, so the first and fourth quarter of the fiscal year, so we passed the first quarter, so that's where the number is below your projection.
The big numbers normally go in that first quarter. However, like I say, we believe that just like on the civilian side of the house, people are kind of holding on to see what happens with the contract.
Okay.
So whenever that contract comes into place, we may have a bubble effect at that point.
Okay.
We don't know.
All right. And Miguel, you have anything else to add as far as how this hiring, the 50 over currently, how that impacts the current budget?
Well, I'm hearing from both the Personnel Department and from the PD is that the goal is not to get beyond 480, correct? Or less. And so I assume that in the course of the year, should the attrition and the hiring not match up, that there would be adjustments accordingly based on the number of folks in each class, particularly for the last 2 quarters of the year.
Correct.
So if the number stays to the number that's been budgeted, which is 480, then there should not be an impact to the budget. I think the question is making sure that we stay to that number and monitoring it closely both from both departments.
We never plan to have a class during December, and of course we're going to have some attrition during December. So just because we're up now doesn't mean we're going to continue to be up through the year. So we're watching it.
Okay, and then also, could you give us an idea, and I think we've moved back and forth on sizes of classes, what is the max that you can put in if you have to make up numbers versus what your ideal is?
Our ideal class is about 40 or 45, according to our training people. The maximum classes that they seem to handle okay is about 60, 65. Okay. But they would prefer not to go that route because our attrition just goes up higher when that happens.
So you have the flexibility if attrition jumps at the end of this calendar year to make up some spots if you do not hire in either November or December.
It is not the most efficient way to operate, and they have made that clear at the training division. But yes, they have been able to handle classes up to 60 or 65 at different points.
Okay. Very good. And then let me ask Chief McDonald, on the issue of looking at your operational plans, depending on what may or may not come about from Miguel's negotiation, what is some of the plans as it relates to deployment and making up the almost $130 million deficit?
Yeah, let me, if I could ask Commander Jeff Greer, he's, if you got that on? Yeah, he's looked into that and able to respond. I would just like to add, we've got numbers that since the department has grown since 2005, nearly 800 officers, and allowed us to do some of the things we've been able to achieve. We're looking at, if we were to go with attrition resulting from no hiring, we could lose as much as 380 officers out of that. So just a word of caution, I guess, from the department side is this can turn upside down on us really fast, and that's the reason that we're as attentive to this and appreciate your care and concern on this as well.
I'm sorry, so could you repeat the question?
I just wanted to know if looking at the $130 million shortfall, what plans does the department have in hand to address that, depending on what negotiations may or may not occur with the CAO and your current unions?
Sir, what the department has done is taken a look at our budget in light of the $129 million deficit we have in our sworn salary account, and we've determined where we could find savings. We found approximately $11.5 million in savings that we've offered up to the CAO's office, and they've accepted.
And what was that?
Overtime.
It was some of the funding from the UB that's being held back for new positions that we got in the budget this year. And
That doesn't count.
Yeah,
That's not money.
oh, asset forfeiture money. There was some equipment that we were supposed to buy that we're going to delay the purchase for.
It was
And
overtime.
well, the overtime issue, what we were wanted to avoid was counting it twice. We understand that there's some communication going on possibly at the negotiation table about overtime. So the CAO did not count that overtime piece in the 11.5 because it was up closer to 22 million. But the overtime piece is being talked about in too many different places. So we took that out of our discussions.
Okay, so we got 11. Did CAO find that is real money?
Yes, we had counted $7 million from the JAG funds, $1 million from the forfeited assets, $1.5 million as a result of the delay in the jail opening.
And that's through the delay through the fiscal year or
That's right.
beyond?
No, delay through the fiscal year.
Okay.
Which is we're not delaying the jail opening for this purpose, but it's just one of the things that is taking place this year, so we're accounting for those savings.
It was actually the funding for the positions that would help us open the jail is what the money was in the UB.
Okay.
And was it not the LAX overtime? Okay.
Because I think we discussed the LAX overtime was reimbursement, so whether that was real money or not. So you've offered up 11. Is there any additional dollars?
Well, the LAX overtime is real money in our budget because you do front that money.
I know, but we're saying it's reimbursed, so if you're not spending it, it's not reimbursed.
Okay.
Yeah. So the issue is, do we have any additional other than for the additional above the 11 million?
No, the only other flexibility we had, like I said, was in our overtime account, and we believe that that's being considered elsewhere, so we did not offer that.
Okay. Understanding that other things are being considered elsewhere, has there been any consideration of an operational plan if those dollars are not realized?
Well, the chief has been very, very consistent in saying that if the concessions did not come forth from PPL, that he is considering furloughs for our sworn officers. He does not find layoffs to be acceptable in any manner because it does reduce our deployable force.
And that number of layoffs, or that number of furloughs would fluctuate as to what was or not received?
What the deficit is,
Yeah,
exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yes. You had a question?
Chair, just a couple. You mentioned $405 million shortfall, but then you also mentioned that this was in the budget, but the budget's been cut, $405 million. The numbers given by the department regarding the personnel, and you said that's in the budget, but I thought the budget was readjusted because of the shortfall.
I understand. The shortfall, that's correct. We do have a shortfall of $405 million. We're finding solutions that does not include any addressing the hiring issue in relation to finding a solution to that problem. They're separate and apart from all the other city departments as well as other departments and other solutions within the PD.
But could that be part of the solution?
Well, certainly that's a policy decision that the council would have to make to address hiring as one of the solutions. At this point in time, that is not one of the things that we're looking at.
So we would consider furloughs before hiring new officers? In other words, furlough current personnel and continue hiring?
That would be a policy decision that your council would have to make, sir.
And then $129 million deficit in the police department salary account. Is that sworn and civilian or just sworn account?
That's just sworn.
Okay, one of the issues, and we've discussed this before, is the number of sworn personnel that are working non-sworn duties that would be done by a civilian, whether it be communications or administrative. How many of those sworn personnel are working in assignments that would be handled by a civilian?
Sir, we recently did a survey about 4 months ago, and we found out that we had about 65 full-time sworn that were performing civilian duties on a full-time basis.
So that's 65 officers, different ranks, that would be in the field or in some type of uniform assignment or detective assignment that are currently working an assignment that could be handled by a civilian, that was handled by a civilian in the past?
Yes, and that was after we accounted for our light-duty people, yes.
And how many light-duty people do we have working inside assignments? In other words, non-uniform, non-hazardous.
Go ahead.
Councilman, could you repeat the question, please?
How many light-duty sworn personnel are working inside administrative-type duties? In other words, not assigned field or detectives, but working administrative-type assignments not related to the field.
The department currently has sworn with permanent restrictions, 518 officers.
500 and what?
518 officers that currently have permanent restrictions.
It means that they will never work a uniform assignment again. If they're permanent, does that mean?
Most likely, yes.
Okay, how many temporary?
Temporary, we have, I believe, we have with temp restrictions, 634.
So 634 temporary light duty, not able to work the field. 518 permanent light duty, not able to work the field. That's 1,100 bodies.
It is. And of the 634, some tomorrow can be out in the field, some will not be out in the field for an extended length of time. There's no way to tell.
That's a huge gap with the 10,000 officers that we talk about. That's 9,000 when you want to take those out of the equation, and then take the 65 that are working administrative positions, and then you take people on vacation or sick. We're like 2,000 officers who aren't really performing some capacity. And we're talking about continuing hiring and maybe furloughing officers. Somehow we need to get that deck in order. The permanent light duty, the 65 full-time officers working administrative functions, but we're talking almost 2,000 police officers. I mean, that's bigger than some departments. The other question regarding the issue of furloughs. Would furloughs, when we discuss that, because I'm not supportive of furloughs, would that include uniformed officers, or would that be administrative officers, or detective personnel?
That's everybody.
When we talk about furlough, what category are we talking about?
It would be all sworn officers.
So you're taking uniformed officers out of the field,
Right.
and giving them a furlough day.
Right. It's regardless of assignment. It's based on sworn officers.
And I know you probably don't support that.
No. It's, I mean, we're in a position where ideally we'd like to be able to move forward without certainly impacting deployment at all, either through furloughs or any other means. But I know we're in a very tough position here, and we're coming before you with a request to keep hiring to attrition, and then at the same time minimize or not have furloughs or other means to be able to reduce field deployment. So we certainly are sensitive to the position that you're in. But our position is strong that in order to preserve public safety, we continue to maintain the position we have relative to the number of light-duty bodies and permanent and as well as temporary light-duty bodies. That's something that we have been able to reduce over time. It's something that we stay on all the time. We're constantly calling people who are at home, encouraging them to come in as soon as they're possibly ready to come back to duty. We're reassessing the people who are permanent light duty and looking at that from an essential functions capability. Can they do the job of a police officer? And we've made great strides with that over the past several years, but we continue to move forward with that as well, so that at some point we're in a position where if somebody is not able to complete the duties of a police officer as of a certain date, then we can move forward and either bridge them over to another class or to be able to, and eventually able to replace the body with a full-duty body.
See, I think if someone is permanent light duty, my interpretation of that is they're never going to be able to work the field again or work the assignment or carry a weapon, whatever the case may be.
Right.
518,
Right.
that's more than most divisions have
Absolutely.
for
Absolutely.
personnel. And if they could be converted to a civilian to fill the 65, another position with this, I'm not saying
What's the date on
farm them out, but I'm saying there's some value, but
Right.
some category that we could still balance the budget and give them a productive assignment if they can't work that assignment of a uniformed police officer.
No, we have Special Order 7 that came into effect back in 2006. And everybody who was permanently light duty at that point was grandfathered in. Anybody who is permanently light duty from August the 2006 on, has to make a choice. They have to make a choice of either going back to their doctor to see if they're better so they can be cleared, or they have to make a choice to go to a civilian job, or they have to make a choice to take a disability retirement or a regular retirement.
Are they
so that is no longer the case that we're adding to those numbers.
Well, are they included in the numbers, the 518, the 634?
The grandfathered in people? Yes.
They're included in that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, one more question I have on equipment. Have we looked at that equipment account, helicopters, police cars, detective cars, motorcycles, SWAT truck, Rams, whatever the case may be, to save what we could save and purchase those down the road, or federal money and use that money to help balance this?
The only vehicles we have in our budget are 70 replacement black and whites, and those are being funded through asset forfeiture. That's it.
So the equipment account's been examined?
Yeah, we've drained that as much as we possibly could. The department's budget's about 96% personnel, 4% for equipment, and the first place we looked at was equipment, and hit that as hard as we could initially before we went into the personnel aspect. And we're down to, as you just heard, 70 replacement black and whites in a big fleet, so that's not much.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Reyes?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you remind this committee what the, I guess this is a question of the CAO, how much savings is the department looking for right now? Or the gross amount. As the budget year began, how much, and we went through our budgeting process as a city council and got it signed off by the mayor, how much were we looking to find within the police department's budget?
Well, within all sworn-related costs, we assumed a $129 million shortfall with sworn-related activities.
Okay, because the department doesn't just have a budget for sworn-related activities. There's more to the department than that, correct? But you're saying when it comes to identifying a reduction of their budget for this fiscal year that we're currently in, at the beginning of the fiscal year, it was identified and the department understood that their job was to find $129 million in this fiscal year's budget?
Well, we identified 129 in PD-related activities, of which the department has identified 11 million, as was stated earlier. The remainder, we're working with PPL to identify savings in the same way that we did with the coalition, UFLAC, and the other bargaining units.
So help me understand, I'm not on the budget committee. So at the beginning of the fiscal year, the department understood that they were expected to figure out how to apply $129 million in savings attributable to sworn activity?
I don't think it was that specific. It was before I got here. Perhaps you could help.
Right. Yeah. What we understood was that we had a 14% shared sacrifice in both our
department, the police department,
in both our sworn and our civilian salary accounts. On the civilian side, we understood that the city was at the table with the coalition of unions, and that would help us solve that issue. Otherwise, we would be implementing furloughs. On the sworn side...
Okay, you're getting ahead of me.
Okay.
You're getting, like I said, I'm not on the budget committee, and most people watching this proceeding or listening to it aren't either.
Okay.
So I want to start from scratch. Since it appears that we're nowhere near the 129 million agreed to activities being reduced or budget being reduced, correct? We're nowhere near.
Well, what we understood was that the city, again, on the sworn side, was at the table with the unions discussing concessions that would be given up by the union that would help us to close that $129 million gap. We understand that the city remains at the table with those unions. So we haven't gotten resolution on that yet to tell us how much would come from those negotiations to help us close our gaps. The only thing that the chief could do is, and he has done it, like I said, from the very beginning, is recommend that we look in our budget and try to find as much savings as we could, which we did, and we offered that up to the CAO, and that his only other option would be to recommend furloughs of sworn officers if PPL and the city are not able to come to to reasonable conclusions on the negotiations.
Okay, so you just touched on something that's part of my questioning, and that is, so the chief of police, the head of this department, the police department, has notified the city council that if the savings of $129 million is not found / and or progressed and ratified, that his recommendation absent that is to implement the appropriate amount of furloughs in order to fill that $129 million gap or whatever portion thereof?
He is very much hoping that PPL and the city will come to some really reasonable conclusions to help us close that.
But I'm asking you a specific question about the head of the department and what his position is, because you just stated his position, and I want to be clear on his position.
From the very beginning, in every document we've submitted to the CAO, to the council regarding how we're going to close our budget, we've been consistent that furloughs would be the recommendation if you are considering layoffs, because he does not find layoffs to be a reasonable resolution.
Okay. So he's determined that based on his responsibilities and his opinion that furloughs would be the second choice if the $129 million is not identified, found, and ratified.
He has nothing else in his means to offer other than the recommendation of furloughs.
And I keep saying his opinion because there is another option, layoffs, right?
And that option he finds to be unreasonable.
Okay, I'm getting to that. See, I don't want to mislead the public who's watching this proceeding or listening to this proceeding. I don't want them to believe that there is only one option. Absent these other negotiations that would have you closing that $129 million gap. I just want to make it clear that you're stating that the head of the department, Chief Bratton, has stated in every document unequivocally that furloughs would be the way to go, the place to go, in order to close that gap. And that it is his opinion that layoffs are not an option.
Can I tell you what his considerations are?
I like clear and concise answers when and if at all possible, or else you're going to find yourself dialoguing with me back and forth for an hour.
You know, furloughs is not a good option. I think we all understand that. But what he is saying
I'll clap too.
He's taken a look at the amount that has been invested by this city, by this council, by the mayor, in hiring all the police officers that we've hired since the mayor's hiring campaign. We spent close to $247 million in salaries for new recruits and in salaries for staff that are involved in recruitment, hiring, selection, polygraphs, training. It's close to $247 million that the city has invested. And to just lay those people off at this point does not seem to be a reasonable option for him. So those are the things that he's considering when he comes to the conclusion that he doesn't have a whole lot of other options other than if PPL does not come through, furloughs.
As I stated, a technical legal option is to lay off as well. And that's not a question. I'm just stating for the people watching. In addition to that, what is the chief's position when it comes to moving toward furloughs and continuing to hire officers that we have not invested $247 million in yet?
He believes that to continue to maintain the force of the department over the long run is a much better option than laying off and not ever being able to catch up with those hires again. If we continue to hire, we are continuing to maintain the size of the force, and in better budget days, those people will be available to us and the furloughs will go away. And we will still have a full force of people. If we are laying off, we would never, it would be a lot of years before we could catch up with that hiring again.
Now, if we stopped hiring or slowed down the hiring and try to maintain the current number of sworn officers, basically continue to hire based on the amount of people who are leaving the department on the natural, and furlough, are officers going to experience the same number of furlough days per officer on average if we continue to hire at the previously intended rate of hiring?
Well, when you talk about stopping hiring,
I didn't say stop, I corrected
Okay.
myself. Slow down the hiring.
well, when you say slow down, you mean to attrition, right?
Correct.
And that is what we're doing. We're hiring to attrition now, so that is the plan. If you were to stop hiring, you're only talking about saving about $9 million total. Because our more expensive people have already been hired for this year. As you go lower in the year, in the fiscal year, those people are a lot cheaper because you're not paying for them for a full year. So you're not going to have much savings from stopping hiring this year.
Okay, now the next scenario is this. If we do stop the hiring, is there a possibility, or is it in the cards for the department, for the police department, to stop the hiring and continue to have the current sworn officers that we've invested so much money into and them not have to furlough?
Again, that would only get you about $9 million. So that doesn't even come close to closing the deficit gap.
Now, that's a $9 million based on a fraction of a year's basis, or what is the amount on a 12-month basis?
That's if you were to stop hiring as of the October class, which has already been, the job offers have already been offered, you would save approximately $9 million for the rest of the year by not hiring.
Well, unfortunately, this council is going to have to reckon with what most elected bodies and mayors and governors have not been reckoning with, and that is trying to figure out structural deficit reduction, not just temporary one-year reduction. So, question to the CAO. $9 million based on this year if we stopped hiring now. What is the 12-month rolling forward basis? What is that savings?
Well, it was 11 million before this October class.
No, you don't understand my question. Forget about this fiscal year. What if at the beginning of the next fiscal year we stopped hiring, and then we account for how much savings that is to the general fund of the City of Los Angeles on a 12-month basis?
Got it.
Matt Crawford, Office of the CAO. On a full-year basis for the hiring plan similar to this year's, 12 classes of 40, you're looking in the roughly $20 million range per year.
Okay, $20 million per year. Okay, thank you.
Short of 123.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Santana, when we had the discussion on the $11 million that have been identified the department, a big portion of it, I think $7 million of it, was from the JAG money, and the discussion at the time was we needed to get permission from the county to do that, and we weren't sure they would be willing to do that. Have those discussions taken place?
We haven't had further discussions beyond what we had talked about, but we need to do that soon in order to be able to account for those $7 million.
Yeah.
I understand that there's been notification to allow the expenditure of those dollars, but it wasn't established how those dollars would be spent to allow us that kind of flexibility.
Okay. And I think it's important for people to know, and Mr. Carnes talked about people that are watching and the few that are here in the audience, that in the City of LA and the police department is no different, that about 85% of every department's budget is in personnel cost. So when we talk about cuts to departments, and we ask for $130 million from the police department, personnel cards can only, just about the only place you can look to generate those kind of dollars. Even the best efficiencies in the police department, whether we eliminate buying cars, helicopter, whatever, is not going to get anywhere near producing $130 million. So personnel is the key to the debate right now. And
Yeah, and in the police department's case, it's even worse than that. It's 96% of the budget.
96?
In personnel, right.
Okay. When we talked about the averaging of the classes of 40 per month, or for DP except for one of the, and there's a discussion we had in this committee 2 years ago, and we embarked on a plan 2 years ago which the department absolutely hates, and that is sculpturing month by month the number of employees you're hiring. Obviously, that creates some inefficiencies in the cadre at the academy. Nonetheless, the question has to be asked, and as we're looking at huge dollar amounts we're short of, What is the cost of a class of 40 as far as salaries, cap, and training costs? I know it used to be $100,000 for training costs per officer. I'm sure that's way out of whack, but I don't think we've adjusted that for a decade. So $100,000 per officer, that's $4 million there. Salary cost on an annualized basis for an officer, a P1?
Probably about 50,000.
$50,000.
50,000?
50 to 60,000, depending on
Okay, so there's 20 million there. So you got 24 million in a class on an annualized basis. And then cap cost, does that include cap costs? No, that's base salary. So you add in another 30, 40% on top of that, 20 million, so another 12 million. So for 1 year cost of a class, we're talking about 40-something million dollars, $42 million or so. Is that about right?
For one class?
Well, you got $50,000 per 40. That's
As far as an annual cost, I think it was mentioned earlier about 20 million for direct salaries. We think it's upwards of about 35 or so, a little bit higher than that.
35.
With all those related costs, your pensions, your health, et cetera.
And that carries on for a year. But if you look at it then on a monthly basis, a couple $1 million a month for each county class.
That's more like right, yes.
Okay, and that you were thinking, and I'm sort of, and the reason why I bring that up is last year or 2 years ago, we asked the department to hire 25 officers here, 34 officers there, 41 if necessary. It sculptured as the attrition went along, so did the hiring plan. And the reason for that is if you hire 40 every single month, no matter what the actual number is, based on the fact that you believe by the end of the year it balances out, the fact of the matter is you're front-loading costs every extra month. You do that, $2 million a month for every class you're off. Right now, we're one full class off, and we've accelerated one full class. That's costing us $2 a month, $2 million a month for the next 9-10 months, or 9 months, whatever. So the factor is that it multiplies the amount of money that the department's underfunded or over budget by hiring mid-year, early year. It's better financially to hire late year than it is early year because it delays the cost factor. And so I think we have not had the debate yet or the vote yet on whether we're going to continue hiring any at all for attrition. But if we do continue, I really believe we need to go back to that old plan as much as the department hates it, and that is hiring to exact need so you're not front-loading the negative cost to the city budget. So it's something, and Mr. Sandan, you weren't here for that discussion, but that was the way we did it 2 years ago. And like I said, the department hates it.
No, we don't. I don't know why you did that. But we don't hate that at all. And in fact, the reason why we did not overspend last year or the year before is because we did exactly that. And especially at the end of the year.
But that's not what you're doing today.
That is not, and the reason why, can I just tell you, the reason why is because December we're not having a class, but we will have attrition. So we need to be a little bit above our attrition right now so that when December comes, we don't have a class, we maybe balance out.
And I'm saying to you, in the past, when we didn't have classes in December, that we added people back in the latter part of the year to offset the loss that you might get in December if you come out of December and you're under plan. If you're over plan, then you're really messed up. If you're under plan, then you can add 5 people in this class, 3 people in that class, and at the end of the year, the number comes out exactly the same, the number of people in the classes, in the academies. The differential is the cost to us is $2 million a month to not do that. And so right now, you're hiring 40 no matter what, and now you're 40 ahead of schedule. If we went into December and got out of the month of December and we're still 40 over, then our budget's really messed up by $2 million for each one of those months. If we fall below, then you add 4 or 5 more people in each one of those classes, and that's what we've done in the past. And I'm suggesting that if we continue if we continue to hire, which has not been decided yet, that we need to go back to looking at hiring to exact attrition and backloading the numbers at the end of the year rather than front loading at the front of the year, which can throw anywhere from $2 to $20 million out of in the budget.
No, I think we get your point there and don't disagree with that. I think where we are this year is that we usually have 13 classes a year based on our deployment periods rather than months. This year, we're going to have 12 classes, and what we're trying to do is have enough of a buffer so that when we get to that end period of the year, that we don't come up short.
Okay.
But your point is well taken relative to how the positions are hired
And
at what point during the year.
I don't think we have hired the last few years December classes, have we?
Yes, sir. We've been hiring
Each year?
13 classes a year for the past 4 years.
All right, so we're just talking about one class differential.
This year was the first year
That's
where...
40.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. If you got a question? Let me just say what we're going to, we have a couple of additional cards on public comment. Mr. Reyes is going to ask this question. We'd ask Paul Weber and Peter Refovich to come up to the podium and with the card.
If I could, I'd just say one more statement, then I'm done, so you can have the floor. The lady alluded to earlier the trash fee, and I think we need to clarify that one more time. The mayor of Los Angeles stated that we are going to initiate a trash collection fee for the purpose of hiring police officers. He was illegally doing that. That was not right. You cannot legally do that. Our city attorney told us you cannot do that. We were starting a trash collection fee because it cost us about $400 million a year to pick up trash free of charge when no other city was doing that. We were the only city in the country of any size that was doing that. And so we initiated a trash collection fee for the legal purposes of collecting money for trash collection, which then freed up money in the budget to be used elsewhere as we chose. But to do that the way the mayor had proposed, and quit shaking your head, to do it the way the mayor proposed and the city attorney opined, that would require a 218 vote to do that. And that was illegal. We didn't do it that way. And Ms. Gruhl introduced a motion in the Budget and Finance Committee Council to clarify that point, that it was not for hiring of police officers. It was to free up the budget, which allowed us the discretion to use it for police hiring. Not that it was for that purpose. So we have to put that on the record. It was never done that way. To do so is totally illegal.
Okay. Mr. Reyes?
Thank you, Councilman Parks. I want to pose a question, and perhaps Chief McDonald, if you can.
Sure.
Well, one, I want to preface what I'm going to ask in terms of my gratitude and all the hard work that's been done by the LAPD and making the city safer. On the same token, I'm looking at this notion of balance.
Right.
I look at, for example, the planning department. They're close to, I believe, 40, just above 40% layoffs, possibly. Recreation and parks, a tremendous cut. Tremendous cut. Much of the work of these departments has to do with how we handle our built-out environment, our physical space, housing, homes for kids and families. So getting to the balancing question, we could continue, I believe, addressing and increasing the number of officers. And I just had 6 individuals shot this past weekend.
Right.
You're very familiar with. And the parents are asking, well, where else do my kids go?
Right.
Like, where do they gather? Where is it? Where can they go for recreation? I think we've tried our best to stretch that out in terms of resources in the city. But eventually, how do we define that balancing point? Seeing that the percentage of our budget is so dedicated to the Los Angeles Police Department. At what point, I mean, where do we see the balancing point, seeing that the pie is shrinking?
No.
And I'd like to get it from you and
Sure.
and also from the Police Protective League, because this is an answer I have to have every time I go to a funeral or to a shooting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to just get a perspective.
No, very sympathetic to what you're asking and sensitive to the whole issue of you have a limited amount of money to spend on all city services. We rely heavily on the services of other city agencies to be able to help us do our job, and you know, we'd love to be able to see that their budgets are intact as they were in past years when things were good. 40% potential in the planning department to be laid off, or the number that you cited, tragic. When I look at it, to be an advocate for the police department, and while we need these other agencies to be able to have open parks, for rec and parks to be able to provide venues for kids to have alternatives to hanging on the street, those are all critical pieces of the web that we call public safety. But I think from our perspective, that if you cut police bodies, and 96% of the budget is bodies, then you further impact that problem and exacerbate the problem that you don't have safety on the streets or in the parks, and that when you cut back, as we say, that thin blue line, if you don't have public safety, if you don't have the perception of public safety in the city, then nothing else is going to work either. So again, I'm an advocate for one department, but from the perspective that I come from, while we take a big portion of the budget, it's my belief that if you have the absence of crime and the fear of crime, then people will go to the parks, people will go to the library, people will come, and the tourism dollars will come in, and the ability for the city to sustain itself will be there. If you don't have that, you don't have much else.
But I think the harsh reality will be that the parks won't be open unless there's someone there. I think the harsh reality will be that the libraries won't be open.
Right.
And so
I guess the balance is you can have libraries open and parks open, but if there's less police and there's less public safety, people aren't going to use them anyway.
No, but the harsh reality is going to be that they won't be open because we won't be able to pay for it.
Right.
Because we're paying for the police.
Right.
I mean, they just won't be open. So that begs the question in my mind, do we work with the unions and management and start expanding the definition of what a police officer does?
Right.
Do they become part of the library? So it can be open because it won't be open.
Right.
It just won't be open. The same thing with the parks. Does that mean that we work to define a different role for the police as they become part of the park system? I mean, are we going to have to get that creative because the cut is down to the bone?
Right.
The facilities will be closed.
Right. I think we do have to get that creative because I think that's where we are right now facing that. As far as changing the role of a police officer to be able to do additional duties, I think we're stretched pretty thin as it is. I think that we need to come up with creative ideas where we work with rec and parks, we work with other agencies around the city, first from our perspective to ensure that the parks or the libraries are safe places to go, and then to be able to look at potential volunteer programs, to be able to look at alternatives to the facts that we have to deal with these issues, at least in the short term, and we don't have alternatives. But I think that we could look at, there's a number of things on the table that we could look at that would include retirees coming in, that would look at the volunteer program being expanded throughout the city, and people to be able to fill the gaps, at least in the short term, to be able to do the things we need to do as a city.
Well, my sense of optimism comes from the fact that in MacArthur Park and Westlake,
right,
the officers did get outside of that
right
box that most officers would say,
right,
that's not my job.
Yeah.
They did take on an additional role,
right,
and there was a different leveraging factor there that did produce more benefits
right,
because of that additional, but it came from the individual.
Yeah.
It came from the person who went beyond what was defined. Now, in talking to the folks who were there for years or did not have that orientation, they would say it's not in my job description.
Right.
And so, do we formalize it? Do we leave it to chance?
No.
Are we going to be in a position to explore that option?
Absolutely.
Because what's going to be tantamount is, given the way the numbers seem to be looking, those who are on the city payroll, the majority of the people on payroll will be officers,
Right.
not the other functions that we've been accustomed to.
Right.
If the numbers bear out the way they've been stated. So I just want to make that very clear to the public that's listening, that I, for one, have benefited as a council member, and my community's benefited, given the level of crime that's been deterred. What happened to the gang in Northeast has created a sense of peace we haven't felt in many, many years.
Right.
But it was because we had a presence. That I understand.
Right.
But now I look at, as the shoe starts to fall, the other shoe, and we start closing these facilities.
Right.
I ask myself, now what?
Right. And I think, and your point is well taken, I think the move from being traditional police officers where enforcement was the main and only focus, we've gone a long way in a relatively short period of time about re-identifying that role to dealing with education, prevention, intervention, and now looking at the back end on the reintegration into society of people coming out of the system, the prison system. It's all one big web, and if we deal with it just in silos, we're selling ourselves short and we're not getting what we can out of all of our people.
18 years ago, we had senior lead officers or folks function as team lead officers, where they actually brought up these slips.
Right.
And officers were actually reporting bulky items.
Right.
They were responding to the broken windows theory.
Right.
You come across another captain, another sergeant, another division, because I happen to have 6. And we mentioned this to them, this was about 15, 18 years ago.
Yeah.
And they say, well, that's not our job.
Yeah.
And so it was a hit and miss.
Right.
So as we continue this cultural shift, if that's what's required, I'm not sure if we're going to get the complete buy-in, but I would love to hear from the Police Protective League to get their impression as to this expansive role, if it's going to be accepted.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. We'd asked Mr. Weber, President of LAPPL, and also Peter Refovich to come up at this time on a response to your cards, and then we'll go to Mr. Rosenthal for your questions.
I believe Mr. Rosenthal had some questions for me, so I'm here to answer them.
You have a presentation.
Well, I can make a quick statement. I believe in the ideal world, we would fully support the full staffing and budgeting of the police department. Obviously, it is the primary duty of city government is protecting its residents. And I know I'm preaching the choir because several of you have been or are currently members of the department. That being said, we're currently hiring to attrition, or slightly there, maybe above that. But whatever that may be, if what the City Council is telling the police department and us as representative of the police officers is that that's not doable, then we go to the next step, which is how do we make up that shortfall? We do not support furloughing highly experienced, highly trained individuals that you've invested literally hundreds of millions of dollars so you can bring new people through the door. Push comes to shove, if the budget is not there and we have to hunker down, it's better to have highly motivated, experienced police officers who are working full-time than to take them off the streets. And what we're being told is, with the proposed furloughs, is we'd lose approximately 1,600 officers a day, 1,100 out of operations, and approximately half the patrol force. That is not sustainable for public safety in the city of Los Angeles. So we do not support that. I agree also that the people that are currently here, laying those individuals off, I believe would be a mistake. Now the question becomes is, then what do we do? I think you have to look, if it's not sustainable, if the monies are not there, then you have to look at your hiring plan, and what do we do about that? And obviously that is a decision for the city council and for the mayor and the electeds in this city to decide. But I think it would be a huge mistake and send absolutely the wrong message to rank and file to tell them that we're going to furlough you, you're going to take a pay cut so we can hire new individuals through the door. I think there's going to be huge resentment. The idea that officers are going to be standing by their phone in case something happens to respond in, like some newspapers have written, is not realistic. They're going to be out there trying to find other jobs to support their families, and that's the reality. So optimum, we would like to see everything continue forward. If the money's not there, then we need to hunker down and make do with whatever is available and make the most of that. And as much as possible, preserve the department, because eventually this economy will come back, and we have to be in a position where we can move forward.
Why don't you just hold tight there? Pete, you have a comment? And then if
no, sir, I defer to the President.
Okay. Now, just hold tight if you have some questions.
Thank you very much for coming up to the mic in the first place, and I appreciate your candor and your discussion. I frankly don't see you as public comment. I see you as a partner with us in negotiation because you represent the rank and file, so we didn't have to clock on, and that's rightly so. Just 3 general numbers I want to get reconfirmed. I'd like your reaction to it. We have 65 able-bodied officers doing civilian jobs. True or false?
That was the results of our survey, sir.
65.
Yes.
Okay, that's question 1. Question 2, we have 518 on permanent disability.
Approximately, yes.
518 on permanent disability, and we have another 634 that are on temporary, what? Light duties.
Right. They have a temporary injury that's going to get better where they can go back out and do full duties again. And the number changes on a daily basis.
I understand.
Yes.
And the last question on that is, when we talk about hiring to attrition and this and that, how many officers right now could retire in an attrition sense, meaning that they got in their time of the total number of officers we have?
We have about just over 500 officers that are eligible to retire right now.
500?
Well, throughout this fiscal year is what we looked at.
And of that 500, how many have?
So far this year?
Yeah.
We have had, well, we've had a total of 117 people attrit out.
So 117 out of the 500. So we have
So far.
potentially another 383 that could conceivably retire out if they wanted to.
They're eligible.
They're eligible.
Yes, sir.
And as you said earlier, it depends on the negotiations and where things go as to how they look at things. Is one of your thoughts?
We believe that's going to have some impact, yes.
Okay, and that will impact it. Now, for our great partners in the city, I got several questions. The 65 able-bodied officers doing administrative jobs, we in budget have brought this up a lot in previous years. What is your take on those 65 able-bodied officers being deployed to the street and filling them with a civilian that's 70 cents on the dollar to an officer? What's your take on that?
Well, obviously, we fully support it. One of the issues has been historically as the city has moved in that direction multiple times. I've been on over 25 years, and I can think of about a half a dozen times at least where the city has made that commitment to civilianize positions. And I can tell you as the president of the league, we support that. Our officers want to work field assignments. They want to be out there doing what they're hired to do. However, the issue that really comes into play is we move in that direction, we hire the civilians, then there's a hiring freeze, or something occurs, we don't end up backfilling those positions, and then the commanding officer has these positions that have to be filled, so they end up taking bodies from patrol, from other assignments, and putting them in there.
Very good point. Personnel, question. Can we undo the freeze for those 65 positions and hire 65 civilians, 70 cents on the dollar, and put those officers back in the field?
We do have an issue with our civilian salary account. We're not flush there. We believe that the early retirement and the negotiations that took place with the coalition will help us with our civilian problem, but we are certainly not flush.
I didn't say you were flush, but what can we do as a council, as policymakers, to make it so that you can hire 65 civilians for civilian jobs, put an able-bodied cop out in the beat?
I have to say that it appears that the priority may be for our salary account being able to open up that jail. So, of course, we're going to need to be able to fill those detention officers. We also have a priority of filling our PSRs so that our response rate, our police service reps, our 911 calls. We also have a priority of filling our equipment mechanic position so we can keep our officers mobile. So we have some priorities that we need to address. And we really don't have flush money in that account to be able to, so we're going to have to save some money for that.
I'd like a report back on how we can fill 65 civilian positions with civilians and allow those able-bodied officers to go back in the field.
I got to tell you that even those critical positions I just named, we've asked for unfreezes for them, and we have not been successful.
Well, bring that up too in a report back. But it is a no-brainer for me to have a civilian in a civilian job, period, and put an officer back in the field. And whatever it takes bureaucratically for us to do it, we should do it.
Well, I mean, we couldn't agree with you more. In fact, I think that's something we need to look at the future. It comes down to finances. We simply don't have the finances to backfill those civilian positions as we move actual officers out to the field. So you need to find that money one way or the other, and that's really the stumbling block. The reason why there's a hiring freeze among civilian employees in the department is because we don't have the finances to pay for them.
I understand, but if you were to say 40 new officers through the academy and this and that come in, you're already looking at 65 you don't have to bring in through the academy because their jobs are sitting there with an able-bodied officer doing the job. And so it's counterintuitive for me to keep an officer in a civilian job at 100% versus 70%. So where there's a will, there's a way. I don't want any double talk. I just want a straight ability to put civilians in a civilian job, whatever it takes us to get there, and put an able-bodied officer in the field. Okay? So I'd like to see it. Second quick one is LAX. Have we resolved LAX in terms of officers assigned to LAX that the general fund is paying for that LAWA said they wouldn't pay for? At one point there were 27. Then Bill Bratton brought it down to 20. And then he said he brought it down to 14. Now, how many sworn officers are at LAX that LAX still feels they don't need or shouldn't have?
That total is 16, sir.
16.
But can we be real clear that they're not officers that we have identified we don't need? That's not the case. So can you explain that some more?
Look, I'm telling you about LAX.
Yeah.
All right? The policing authorities at LAX, and I don't care if it's TSA or the LAWA police or everybody else, have for years said that they have a certain complement of LAPD officers that are part of the agreed-upon strategy. But there are a bunch more there that LAX feels that they don't need them there. First it was 27, then it went to 20, and Bratton said it was 14. Now I'm hearing it's 16.
It's 16.
Okay. How do we get those 16 back into the general LAPD on-the-street role?
The role that they have, sir, is consistent with the general LAPD role. They're doing.
I'm sorry, say that again?
The role that they fulfill now is consistent with the LAPD role. They're fulfilling, providing police services in RD 1494, which is in the airport area. But a lot what they deal with in that particular RD and surrounding RDs is dealing with burglary from vehicles. That role and responsibility, the things that they're doing would be done whether they were in Pacific or LAX. That responsibility still would have to be maintained.
I would much rather you put them with Pacific and show them as LAPD officers than doing it out of LAX, and LAX refuses to pay for them.
I understand your point, sir. But the question regarding their role, what they were doing, whether they were at Pacific or LAX, it would be the same thing. Those RDs would still have to be patrolled and deal with those particular crime problems.
All I can tell you is it's been ongoing since the 4 years I've been in this council, where LAWA says we don't need those officers, you've given us more than we want. Bratton said, no, we want them there. I've said to the mayor, well, you make a decision. No decision was made. Here we are back in a budget crunch crisis again. LAWA can afford to have policing officers, but I want that issue resolved.
Yeah, if I could just touch on that. I think apples and oranges here. The officers are housed in a trailer at LAX, but their duties include patrolling an area that we're responsible for the crime that occurs in that area, and that's what their job is. Whether they're housed in that trailer or at Pacific Division, is 6 of one, half a dozen of another. They're there on site. If we have an incident there, we're going to be sending, in addition to LAX officers, and we have a great relationship with LAWA PD right now, never been better. So I don't think there's an animosity issue at all, as maybe there had been in years past. Right now, it's fairly seamless. The LAWA PD has their role and responsibilities. LAPD has our role and responsibilities, and we support each other very well. I think the fact that they're housed there gives us the ability then, if we have an incident at the airport of a critical nature, then we have the ability to be able to, somebody's cell phone, we have the ability to be able to get resources in there quickly, to have our own people on the ground, on our frequencies, directing people in, to be able to set up a command post, to be able to do the things that will save time and lives under a major crisis.
Well, what I'd like to see is, again, a report back of the LAPD with the LAWA police addressing that issue, because the LAWA police and the general manager over there have felt those 14, when they were 27 and 20, were general fund obligation. They weren't going to pick up the tab. I want LAWA to pick up the tab for all policing officers and not hit our general fund if, in fact, they're part of the LAWA issue.
Yeah, right. I think it's more an issue of, and we would love it if they would too, but their role goes beyond the scope of what LAWA PD does.
Okay.
Their crime.
I understand. That's the first time I've ever heard that it was a separate issue as well. But I'd like a report back on that. Okay. And if I could ask the unions these tough questions. We were told 518 permanently disabled officers who are in non-positions. What can we do in a graceful, dignified way of getting them out of a police uniform, paycheck, and all of that if they're permanently disabled? Can we retire them? Can we do something? What can we do about those 518?
My understanding is those 518 were grandfathered in before essential duty functions. The city's already agreed to maintain them in their current assignments. The majority of them work assignments like the front desk, security type assignments, also working the kit room where they manage and care for sensitive police equipment, including radios, shotguns, ammunition, and other things. They are working full-time. It's just they are not actually working patrol. But if you look at the way the department's designed, the majority of the department isn't actually pushing a black and white. It's kind of like the Army. For every person you got on the front line, you've got 10 behind them to make sure that they have the support they need. So these officers are doing an important function. It's just they're not particularly out in the field. So there isn't anything currently available to the city or the department in regards to those individuals other than allowing them to continue on with their career unless their injuries become worse, in which case they could end up going out on pensions.
Appreciate that. Personnel, have we done an analysis of those 518?
You mean as far as their injuries are concerned?
Yeah, and what the story is and so on.
Injury analysis? I don't think so. No.
You haven't?
No, not an injury analysis.
Okay.
No, sir.
Could you give us a report back on those 518?
Certainly we can.
Let us know really what the story is from personnel perspective. And then also the 634, Mr. Weber, who are part-time or in a moment. What's your take on that number?
The temporary light duty, that number literally fluctuates hour to hour, day to day. What we have found out from talking to workers' compensation is that our sworn tend to come back to work quicker than other city employees. And keep in mind, if a person has a reoccurrence, they may be off, light duty or temporarily off for like a day or two, and they come back to work. So that number is going to fluctuate.
Well, I appreciate everybody's conversations. And your opening comment, again, on furloughs, under no circumstances would you appreciate a furlough. Is that right?
No, we can't support the idea of furloughing employees that are here currently doing the job, and I would say very successfully. Without fail, we've driven down crime under Chief Bratton for the last 7 years. So I think it would be a huge mistake to reward those efforts with furloughs.
And if we have to balance the budget over something to balance the budget, you would say foregoing a new hire period, not even to attrition, or are you saying we must go to attrition?
I believe the worst case scenario would be if that's the place that we're at, that we stop hiring, period. If everything else is on the table, which includes the entire city budget, and you've looked at it and you say there's nothing left, and you have to decide between furloughing and layoffs of active sworn, yeah, that would be our position, is you stop hiring. It's better to have a trained, motivated employee than 9,000 plus individuals who you are furloughing and do not feel that the city appreciates their efforts.
I appreciate that very much. And then my last question, which will go to you, we'll first ask personnel, bonuses. What is the dollar figure of our bonuses every year? What are we right now doing on a bonus? How much?
It's $73 million.
$73 million in bonuses. And is the city staff able to tell me the breakdown of that $73 million for what those bonuses are broken down for?
Yes, we do have a list of all the bonuses.
Can we have a published copy of that, all of us here, so we can see it?
Mr. CAO.
We have a copy of that, so we'll send it to all the members of both committees.
But it's roughly $73 million in bonuses.
I have a little bit more, $75 million.
$75 million in bonuses. And then my question to you guys would be, if we're in the tightest of tight, would you be willing to talk about those bonuses in the context of this whole deal? Oh, I can't negotiate. All right. Anyhow, that's a hypothetical question.
I'll hypothetically decline to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I wanted to clarify something. Mr. Rosenthal.
Do any members have any more questions of the police union so that they don't have to stand there?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Paul, you do?
Thank you.
Why don't you guys have a seat just briefly, and then...
Yeah, does anybody else? I could wait. If anybody else has questions for them, I could wait
All right.
afterwards.
Why don't we do this? Dennis, why don't you give your question, then Paul, And then, Jose, you call
I have a question regarding the PPL, Paul. Regarding Y rating, when we look at about 10% of the LAPD, either permanent light duty or light duty, has it ever been discussed about Y rating where they would be converted to a civilian position to fill some of those 600-plus civilian positions that are being held within the department? Has ever been discussed with the Protective League?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's not to say that it hasn't occurred. I just don't personally know.
Sir, that is a specific part of our Special Order 7 that requires that if a person becomes disabled, permanently disabled, and cannot perform the essential duties beyond August of 2006, they have 3 considerations. One is to go back to their doctor if they've made some recovery to get the restrictions lifted. One would be to consider 1014ing to a civilian position, and the last would be considering retirement, either disabled retirement or regular retirement.
And how many have taken advantage of that?
We could get you a report. I don't have that number off the top of my head. However, the 1014...
Date was 2006, August, which is when essential duties came into effect.
Right.
So
Right.
all those grandfathered don't count toward the Y rating.
I understand that, but we could offer, if they wish to convert, they could convert if that opportunity, and they'd like to do that. Some people might take advantage of that, to offer that, to clear up those positions. What I'm trying to do is find $120-some million in different pockets and not jeopardize with furloughs. And I'm thinking that with that many folks, if we would offer that to them, you're working in an administrative position now, would you want to retire from the police pension and then convert over in a civilian position and do that? If that's offered, someone may take advantage of that, and then we could fill those positions. They'd have a position, and we would clear some of those roles. That's what I'm looking at. That hasn't been approached to the Protective League, though.
Not in that manner. I'm not 100% sure it would achieve what you're looking for.
Well, what I'm trying to find out is if we can, when 10% of the workforce is either permanent or temporary light duty, that is a huge number of personnel. What I'm trying to do is free those numbers up and fill some of the backlog. We talk about civilian positions, to convert them to civilian positions. If they're eligible for a pension, they could get a pension, which is the police and fire pension, which doesn't impact them on the civilian side. They could then become a civilian, work that position as a civilian, which frees that position as a sworn person, and then we wouldn't have to worry about blocking those positions, those 1,100 positions. That's what I'm looking at.
Well, I think there's 2 issues. One is the people that are permanent light duty, which is completely different. The temporary...
I'm talking about permanent, just permanent.
Well, then we're only talking a little over 500. And the question becomes, if you don't have the budget to hire civilians to replace them, if in fact they're working a civilian job, most of them are working sworn assignments like the front desk, like other assignments within the station that need to be handled by sworn. They're just not capable of, going out into the field. Like I said before, you need these individuals in the stations to do those roles. Now, the question becomes, if we get outside of that number, where we get to a point where we exceed it, and I think essential duty functions is going to prevent that from happening, because anyone who's currently injured now falls under essential duty functions, and they would end up in a situation like has been described by the department, and most of those individuals will probably end up taking disability pensions.
Okay, I'm just trying to find ways to fill the civilian positions at the same time, not harm the officers who are injured doing legitimate work. And if that opportunity presented itself, if they'd want to take advantage of that, both ends, they could be collecting the police pension on one side, they could fill a civilian role on another side, if they're eligible for that.
Maybe in another time when there's money, I'm sure
Well, that's what I'm trying to
well worth discussing.
I'm trying to find the money. Thank you.
I understand.
I was actually going to ask this question of staff first, but maybe I'll ask it backwards, which is, I had heard a number as high as 700 in terms of the number of people that weren't injured but were doing jobs that could be done by civilians. I was surprised at our last council meeting to hear the number placed at 65. I wanted to get the PPL's take as the folks that are actually out there on the streets. And in the stations. Do you think the 65 number is correct, Or are there potentially hundreds of additional positions that could be civilianized, which I have heard from other folks with the LAPD at various times?
I'm not aware of how it was defined to get to that number of 65. I'm not privy to that. But there are positions within the police department that we've had discussions with the CAO that could potentially be civilianized that are currently sworn positions. But what that exact number is, I don't know. But 65 does appear to be fairly low. But again, it just depends on how you define it and how you got to that number. But there are positions that theoretically could be filled by civilians that currently aren't.
I don't know if I could follow up that question by asking staff the same question. I've heard from folks with LAPD that the number was probably closer to 700. 65 was kind of shockingly low. Is that really the number of folks that if we tried hard to civilianize every position that we could, the maximum that we could do that with is 65 positions?
Can I just clarify what the discrepancy may be? When we talk about the 65, we're talking about positions that are currently identified as civilian positions, civilian duties that are performed by sworn. And that number we identified as 65 full-time officers. There's also an audit that was done a couple of years ago by the controller of positions that are currently identified as sworn duty positions that can become civilian duty positions. That number was well over the 500 level. And that number, the chief asked for the audit by the controller, and he's more than willing to visit that civilianization issue again. However, since that audit was done, there has not been funding for the civilian side of our house to be able to fill those positions because, of course, if you take the sworn out of the positions, they become civilian jobs, you have to hire civilian employees. We have been frozen the entire time since that audit was done. So we have not been able to address the issues of that audit.
Mr. Chair, if I could make one point, even though I think one of the things we've sort of danced around, we've talked about a lot when we say, okay, we can cut some officers here, well, we can't fill those positions because they're civilians. I think what we're talking about is cutting back on the magic number that I'm not aware has any real magic, which is 10,000 officers on the streets. Frankly, I think what the council is talking about is the actual impact in the community, people actually out in the streets. So if you've got 500 sworn officers, that gets you to 10,000. I think we're talking about saying, all right, you cut those 500 sworn officers, you don't replace them, you cut them by attrition, you replace them with civilians, and you save millions of dollars. I think that's what the council is saying. And yes, PR-wise, it might be a little weaker because we no longer have 10,000 officers. But as I've said before, I consider those sort of phantom officers. Those are sworn officers where we're wasting their skills and their training and the expense we want to get it, when their work could be done by civilians that don't have that training and don't have that value and expertise. So I think that's what we're looking at, and the big question is, why can't we do that?
It's kind of going back to the same argument again. We haven't been funded in the past to be able to do that, so we end up putting officers into positions that we'd rather not put them into, and I'm sure they'd rather not be in. If we had the funding, we've got 300 civilian vacancies now. If we were able to be fully funded or funded more than we are now, we'd be able to free up those 65 plus, look at options to be able to further civilianize the department. That would be everybody's goal, because we're all aware of the cost of a sworn officer, but it comes right back again to the bottom line.
And what I'm saying to everyone is I think we're more than funded. If you're funded for 500 sworn officers and you cut them through attrition and you take that money to replace them with civilians, well, then you've saved millions of dollars in the process. So that funding is there. It's just a question of which pot of money it's in.
Right.
Jose?
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Gratz. And I think that's as direct as this committee has asked it. Also in our Audits, thank you very much. I don't want to have you guys standing there anymore.
Ed has one
Ed?
question.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to pose the same question I posed to the chief in terms of the roles of the officers, and I'd like to ask this of the union leadership. Let me just play this out. Let's say there's the library in Pico Union. I get the note from the department that I have to close down your department, your library in that area, because of lack of personnel. Let's assume that there's a dialogue with the management approaching the unions, and there's a proposal to have maybe 2 officers to keep the library open, to be there as part of their security and dealing with the problems there in that area. Do you see the Police Protective League participating at that level where that role will exist, where you expand the policing, where you actually have bodies in the library?
Just so I'm clear on your question, you're saying actually signing 2 police officers full-time, 24/7 to a library?
24/7, no, because it's not open 24/7.
Okay.
We're talking about
Just during
keeping
the
a
normal
building
business hours?
open. I mean, I'm at a point where the choice is keep the library closed or keep it open maybe 2 times a week, 3 days out of the week, for at least 6 to 8 hours. Does the police participate in that or not?
I would say that's a complete waste of police resources, because police officers are not trained to be librarians. That is not why they joined the police department. And I think the first time there's an emergency call down the street, they're going to be gone and the library will be unattended. The reality is,
So you see us shutting down the libraries?
Yes.
Because we need police?
Yes.
You see us shutting down parks because we need police?
Yes. If what you're telling me is a choice between assigning 2 police officers to a library to act as librarians, I think that doesn't make any sense, because we're not trained to do that job. It's not what these officers signed up for. And I'm not sure that the public really wants to see armed police officers,
So the
reading to
millions
their
of
kids.
dollars we spent on new libraries goes to waste because we shut them down.
I don't believe there's a good answer, but putting police
But I'm just
officers...
trying to get a sense of posture and attitude as to the role of the city family.
I think police officers are going to do whatever they're assigned by the police department within reason. Now, if the police department wants to assign police officers to libraries, I'm sure we can find someone who would be willing to work that assignment. But I do not believe that that's what the public pays its taxes for. I don't think that's what they want.
I'm not looking for extremes. I mean, I heard someone chuckling and laughing. I'm not trying to be ridiculous here. I'm looking at a very desperate situation where tax dollars are spent in the millions for new libraries, and now I'm being told that it has to shut down because we have to fulfill the budget for the police officers. Because I have to fill the police officers' budget, I have to shut down the parks. Is there flexibility on the union's part to allow for this expansive role to find a solution?
We work with the department on all issues. Now, this is obviously a huge hypothetical question.
Yes, but it's real.
The thing is what we found in the past is when you take police officers out of their role, what they're good at, what they've been trained at, what you spent all that money to have them do, is they don't perform well in those assignments. I think we're willing to do whatever is reasonable working with the police department, but to be honest with you, I understand the predicament that you're in, but there's no good solution. In saying that police officers can fulfill certain roles, you can assign them to whatever role you want. It's just, is that what you want them to do? Now, if the will of the council is that you want to place police officers in those assignments, you know what, we'll work with the police department to try to get to where you want to go. But I'll be honest with you, I don't believe the public will support that.
I'm sensing some flexibility if we ever get to that place. Because we literally are in a dire situation. We are literally talking about hundreds and thousands of layoffs the way it is currently moving. And the starkness of it is going to be felt the most. We have the most dense people, the poorest people, people that have suffered the most crime. Those are the areas that are going to feel it at its sharpest point. And so I'm asking you if there would be that flexibility, and I'm hearing a yes.
I'm hearing that we're flexible to talk about all those issues, but I believe that the people that live in those areas, since I've worked those areas, they want officers in black and whites. They want detectives responding to their emergency calls for service. They want us out there dealing with the gang members. That's what they're looking for.
I don't think that's not, I don't believe that will be eliminated. I'm just talking about being able to fill these huge gaps. What you're saying is I'm not in any way advocating that what you just described goes away. I think we'll probably need it even more because there'll be less opportunities for our youngsters to keep themselves busy, and what you just described will probably double, if not triple, because they have nowhere else to go.
I understand that, but at the same time, I hear other people talking about going below attrition. So there's going to be less officers working the field, less officers available to respond to calls for service. I'll be honest with you, I think we're just in a bad spot all the way around, and I think the police department has taken a hit, will take a hit in regards to its budget. I think officers are going to be working, harder than they currently are, which is hard to fathom because they are literally on the run from the time they log on till the time they go into watch. Most of the time they're working overtime. So I'm not sure how we get to that place. But obviously we're prepared to work with the police department. But I'll be honest with you, I think everyone's going to suffer, especially the libraries and other things because of the budget situation.
No, I appreciate your answer, and I guess get a little taken aback when I hear laughter and scoffing at the question because these are the very same people that probably don't live in my neighborhoods. These are the very same people that probably don't understand just what kind of duress our parents are going through because of the lack of these services, and furthermore, because they know that their children will be in more danger with less police. So, again, you're right. We're all going to suffer together on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Where
I'm sorry, can you start again? 'Cause I didn't hear you.
I wanted to address your specific point. Down the street, there's youth athletic leagues that are run in part by the Sheriff's Department. They're scattered throughout the unincorporated areas of the County of Los Angeles. One of the benefits of the youth athletic leagues is that it builds a new kind of relationship between law enforcement and the community because the community is able to interact with law enforcement for more than just the traditional role in terms of recreational services. The downside of that is that it's an expensive program, and certainly having officers engaged, or in this case, sheriff deputies engaged in sort of recreational activities makes for a very expensive recreational leader. And so to address that, the county, there's a separate foundation that is supported by the sheriff that started before Sheriff Baca, that really started under Sheriff Block, that is private dollars that support the youth athletic leagues throughout the county. And as a result, they're pretty much run independent from the county general fund, and are able to provide that service through the Sheriff's Department, but in a different kind of policing. It may make sense in the long term to look at that as a model, but from a cost-benefit analysis, it does create for a very expensive rec leader. So you want to make sure that you have another source of funding to maintain it.
If I could, Councilmember, we have pretty much the same thing. We have a number of our youth programs, well, all of our youth programs are actually not funded by the city. They're funded through the Police Foundation with private funds. The city contribution is officers we have assigned or deployed to that function to help oversee it. We have PAL programs, police activity leagues, in most of the divisions around the city. We have Jeopardy programs. We have a number of different programs, the Explorer programs, the DAPS programs, and others that give kids options. Those programs are not as big as we would like to see them, but much on the same model as the Sheriff's Department has done. We're also working in that regard and always looking to expand it as much as we can.
Well, thank you for that insight. Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
I do have one question for the Police Protective League representatives that are here. If the police department were to furlough 1, 2, 3 days a week of their current 10,000 or so officers and then continue to hire officers, what do you think that would do to the morale and the productivity of the police force of the city of Los Angeles?
Well, I believe that it would have a devastating impact on morale. Obviously, police officers want to work. That's why they joined the police department. They want to do a good job for the residents. But I think they would see it as a slap in the face, that basically they're expendable, so that a artificial goal is met. Realistically, police officers go out there day in and day out and risk their lives, and I think it would be devastating to morale. I can't see an upside to it whatsoever, and it's going to impact. And I think what's going to end up happening is when the economy gets better, other agencies start hiring, these people are going to go someplace where they believe that they're more appreciated, and we'll end up becoming the training ground for California like we were just a few years ago.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Thank you very much for no more questioning.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. This is for our staff. I think I want to just elaborate a little bit on what Mr. Zine, Rosenthal, and Koretz mentioned. And that is, I think if we're always going to be hiring new officers, right? We always have attrition. We're always going to hire. What we can do is start a plan to move in that direction is to freeze 65 positions of what we're going to hire, and then move those 65 civilians over and get those officers to make up for those 65 we think we're going to have out on the street. I think that's what some were mentioning, and I know we brought this up in Audits Committee a few months back, and if we could move in that direction, whatever it may take, whether, as Mr. Rosendahl mentioned, is that if we're having problems with the personnel department, just come back to committee, or we'll have you all in the same room and we could come up with some exception to the exception and make it happen. So I think that's the direction our council would like to go. Secondly, I want to clarify some numbers. I know that, well, this is not a clarification, it's just a point. I know I certainly see a lot more officers than 16 at LAX. When I go and, there are different entry points and exit points whenever I travel, and I tell myself, this is just, wherever gate I go to, different airline, they're there. And so it does seem like there's a lot more than 16. Is there a reason for that, or are we at 16?
Well, for a long period of time, we had off-duty officers off-duty on overtime working at the various checkpoints in each of the terminals. They have since, as Laua PD has been hiring, they have since been replaced full-time by on-duty Laua police officers. So there is still a very limited number of those people deployed in that manner, and that is going away completely. The number we have assigned out of the substation is 16.
Okay, so the number we have assigned out of the substation are 16, but there are perhaps uniformed officers being paid with a different funding account for those other officers. Is that accurate?
Yes, there are other officers at LAX that are being paid by LAX. And there's about 45, somewhere between 37 and 45 officers there.
Okay, that makes more sense.
A lot of different, I think there's a bomb unit there, a K-9 unit there.
And those are using airport funds, which are not general fund dollars, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. They're being reimbursed. Okay.
Yeah, the 16 number, just to clarify, were extra bodies that were put there post 9/11. The Chief Bratton made the call to put out there, which was above the deployment that had been there earlier.
Okay. And the 383 eligible for retirement, how many of those are drop?
Are you talking about sworn?
Sworn.
There's a little bit over 500 eligible for retirement through this fiscal year.
Yeah.
There's 47 that have to go, that are on drop this year, that have to go this year.
Okay.
There's a total of 550-ish on drop altogether, but, they have various end dates.
Okay. And if we say we're about 42 over our target number of officers that we want to hire, and we're looking at November and December hiring classes, you said we recruit 50 or 40 out of
each class was about 40, but we're not having a class in December.
Pardon me?
We did not plan to have a class in December.
Or November, okay.
So November would be the next class, yes.
November would be the next class. Is there any administrative problems if we reduce the number that we're entering, let's say, to 25, if we want to keep up with whatever additional number of officers we already have coming in that we didn't expect?
Depending on how attrition goes, we may need to do that, reduce the size of the class. And we have done that in the past. We've increased and lowered the size of classes depending on how we were going to end up at the end of the year, so we would stay within budget. We took a look at reducing the classes down to 30, 35, and it saves a few $100,000. It didn't even get us to $1 million over the fiscal year. So the savings involved in reducing the size of the classes at this point is very minimal.
It's very minimal. But
because our expensive people, like I said, are hired at the beginning of the year, and we've hired those people already.
But that's for that first year, or is that on an annual basis from here on out, every fiscal year? We're saving about $100,000 or so?
It depends on when you cut the class. If we had cut the class in July and August, we probably would have saved in the millions. But as you get down further in the fiscal year, you're not paying for a whole year's salary. So the salaries yield you a much smaller savings as you get lower in the year.
Okay, but you're talking about just this one year fiscal year. I mean, every year, how much of a savings would we have if, say, we lower the class from the 40 that we've been doing to, let's say, 20, 25?
I can tell you that for attrition, to hire 480 this year, which is what we estimated our attrition would be, the line item for that was close to $30 million. It was 24 or 25 million for salaries and about 4 or 5 million for equipment and expense.
Okay. And you mentioned earlier that there's some other civilian positions that we're looking to fill, 100 detention officers, for example. Is that number accurate for our new jail?
31 detention officers that you approved in the budget, yes.
So we are hiring more. How many more detention officers?
We cannot hire them at this point. They're frozen, and the money is in the UB.
What will we do with the new jail if we don't have those officers?
I'm going to let operations respond to that.
If we don't have those officers, we will have to try to work with what we have. Maybe it's a pod configurement, and we would have to, if we open the jail, it would be with less pods to open at the time.
Okay. I'm sorry, what was that?
Oh, if we were to open the jail, February 1st is the date that it's tentative to be open. When we get to that point, we'll have to make a determination on how many pods we would open, because based on the number of personnel that we don't have a sufficient amount to have the optimum number of people to open all the pods and to have female housed in the jail. Okay. So options could be not housing females there. Females will be housed as they currently are, and then we reduce the number of pods to open. So the 512 beds that are allotted in that particular facility, that would be reduced to where we wouldn't have it all 4 pods open. We maybe open 2 and then expand it to 3 on weekend days, on busy days.
Okay, so we are going to open up the new facility without using all the new pods and beds and everything else.
I think, with a new facility like that, it would be, I think, in the best interest to open it. But to make it happen, we'd have reduced resources to do so. We wouldn't have the full complement of people like we would love to have it if we could.
So let's say we reduce the number of officers in the academy. That money we save from that will go back to make up the deficit we have, but we can't fill in new detention officers, right?
Sir, that money would not be savings. It's already taken out of our budget. So it's not there.
But you wouldn't use it. Let's say we're going to have less number of officers in the academy, and we're going to use that money to hire the detention officers. You would have other priorities for that.
Well, the money's not there. It's not as if the money is there and we're trying to save it so you can take it back out. It's just not there. It was taken out before the budget was established.
But what if we ask you to hire officers and we're going to save money by not having more officers in the academy?
If we were to stop hiring, you could possibly save $9 million. It would not come close to filling our budget gap.
And how much is the furlough per day?
The furloughs we were looking at, and the plans have changed, the scenarios have changed. The scenario we were most recently looking at was 18 furlough days, which would save about $64 million.
How does that break down?
That's about a day a pay period, or is it? Yeah.
This fiscal year, the whole year, it's going to be $64 million for 09-10, starting October, another 6 months, $64 million. Okay. And we're being asked today to vote on the emergency declaration to extend furloughs for sworn personnel. There's still negotiations going on. I'm not sure why we would act on that today. CAO, why would we act on this today? Shouldn't we just wait till see what comes out of ERC?
That would be my recommendation.
That's your recommendation?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. You have another question, Mr.
Yes,
Rizzo?
another question.
You're going to do your drop question?
If we stopped hiring now, in this fiscal year, how much money would we save?
$9 million.
My colleagues who are doing the numbers here comes up with $40 million. Do we need to explain how we came up with? He came up with $9 million.
9? If we stop hiring now?
Well, just if by the October figure it was $12 million, and for the full year is $20 million.
For the full year, it was $20 million.
Right.
That didn't count the training cost.
No, those are just the hard costs.
That's the hard salary cost.
That's right.
Okay, you got to add the cap cost, which is 40%, and add the training cost. The actual cost for every one of those officers is $170,000.
Well, the $9 million is basically the salary costs. You would have some training costs that would be, we possibly could save. Regarding training, it is going to depend on how long do we stop hiring. Meaning there's a component in personnel department, and they have their staff and their recruiting program, and there's also the monies that would be in the department as well. So you'd have 9 plus some savings in training. Now, on the pensions and health, that's the other big component in both of those. Sure. We've already made our payments to the pensions, so we would not see savings in the current year for those officers. However,
we see the savings in next year.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to get to that. You would see perhaps a little bit of health savings this year. The big savings, as you mentioned, would be for next year, where it would be close to $40 million.
Okay, so at least we got a little more numbers.
And then also in 2011-12, you do a little savings on pension.
It would, depending on what you do with training or hiring in the future. That's correct.
That's it. Thank you.
Mr. Gretz, you had another question?
Yeah, I had questions and comments. First of all, we're looking at our options. Obviously, layoffs make no sense because you couldn't possibly in your right mind actually be hiring people and laying them off at the same time. That would actually be insanity. So it's not an option. It makes no sense whatsoever. I don't even need to ask you that question. You can't possibly justify hiring people as you're laying them off. What seems to me to make the most sense, and I'd like to ask you to respond to this, is stopping new hiring dead in its tracks. And immediately, first of all, civilianizing every single job that you can civilianize, taking the money that you would pay for those sworn officers and use them for civilians and pocketing what's left to help reduce the deficit. Probably wouldn't work as much this year, but it would help more ongoing next year as we continue to do that. We're not talking about laying people off, so we wouldn't get to 500, 600, whatever the numbers are of positions that could be civilianized. But to me, that makes the most sense. You have the question at the airport. At some point, we'll sort of finalize that debate. From my point of view, those 16 officers that the airport isn't willing to pay for shouldn't be out there. So from my point of view, you reduce another 16 officers off that total number, the magic but not very magical number in my view of 10,000. Again, you don't take people that regular citizens see off the streets. You look at furloughs as an alternative. To me, it doesn't make any sense for a lot of reasons. You would appear to have increased pension liability by hiring new people and then still doing the furloughs rather than not hiring more people and keeping them on board. You pay more for training of additional new people, and you reduce the morale at the same time. So my first question is, why don't we stop hiring dead in our tracks, start civilianizing, and stop paying all these extra expenses? Because I would think long-term, it's not sustainable to pay for 10,000 officers, including the ones that are doing jobs that could be done by civilians. I think we have to really identify what the level is of service that we're really getting today in terms of officers out on the streets, and continue that level of service while replacing, through attrition, the sworn folks that are doing what civilians could be doing. And I'm not sure who I should ask about whether that makes sense or not.
Well, in terms of civilianizing the workforce, I think I haven't heard anyone object to that as something to do, and I certainly am very supportive. And in our conversations with PPL, I know they've been supportive and have identified various positions that they believe could be civilianized. So it's something we want to aggressively look at. A slight wrinkle in all of this, of course, is that we have a number of civilian positions in the police department that are very vulnerable to layoffs, particularly EAA members, which, if those layoffs proceed forward, then the likelihood that the department is going to have to backfill those positions with sworn personnel increases. So we have that as a challenge. On the issue of hiring, certainly, that's a policy decision that your board is grappling with. And because within the context of the budget, there was a certain commitment to hiring to attrition, I think if the department were to change that course, that policy directive would have to come from your council.
Yeah, and I certainly wouldn't object to giving that direction. Is there not ability for us to protect essential positions that would have to be filled by more expensive sworn officers in the process, or do we have to allow laying off people that we know we need to keep in place?
Well, that's what we're going through now in the operational plans that are being developed. Part of the challenge is that, of course, in other departments, many of those positions are revenue-generating positions, and some of them are highly skilled positions, particularly in technology. So there are various competing priorities, if you will. So, ultimately, it's going to be impossible to address all those priorities. There's going to be an impact. And I'll get into this later in the discussion in terms of what would happen if ERIP doesn't pass, because very frankly, the layoff furlough picture looks much worse should it not be ratified later this month.
If I may, just to sort of highlight and to put into context what we're looking at, the department, when the budget was adopted, had a shared sacrifice, $129 million in sworn and another $31 million on the civilian side. That's close to $160 million that they were asked to solve for. To date, it looks like their shortfall is roughly about $140 million. So between both salary account. So if you look at the challenge ahead of us, trying to shift monies from sworn to civilian, there's still a hole here, and we don't know what the outcome of EREP, who will actually take EREP. There's a lot of unknowns as we go forward.
I have to assume, though, that these would be, since they'd be revenue-generating changes in essence. I mean, if you took out 500 sworn personnel through attrition and you replace them with 500 civilians, I'm estimating that would save us about $15 million a year. How could we not do that? Because there's a competing priority. That would be a clear, definable, unavoidable savings of $15 million a year.
If I may, I think conceptually what needs to be understood is that we have a hole of about $140 million, and if we were to hire more civilians, move sworn back out to the field and hire some more civilians, that would increase our hole, because we'd have to be paying for more people on our payroll that we're not paying for right now.
I don't think that's true. We're not talking about keeping the sworn people out on the street. we're talking about reducing the total number of sworn officers then to 9,500. There can't be a way that costs money.
Well, then, if we were to reduce to attrition and reduce and do no more hiring, we would save about $9 million in our sworn salary account this year. That just makes the hole a little bit smaller. It goes
Correct.
from $140 million to roughly $131 million. But then if we were to start hiring civilians, then our hole would get bigger again because there's no money to shift. We would just we'd have to bring in more money to pay for those civilians, and which would create a bigger hole, or we would need money to take care of those people.
Right, so this year it might only save a few $1 million.
Right.
As opposed to not saving it, which I think is a weaker choice.
Sir, can I just, historically, this department has been on board with civilianization, and historically, we have civilianized hundreds of positions. However, over the years, because of the continuing hiring freezes, those positions were filled at one point, they became frozen, and now they just get wiped out of our budget. So it's a vicious cycle for us. We agree to the civilianization because we think it's a good idea. We get allocated the positions, they get filled. When they attrit out, they get frozen, and we don't have the positions anymore. So it's a vicious cycle because we have to bring the sworn back in to do those duties again. So I understand what you're saying, and I think that the chiefs are all on board with revisiting the civilianization issue, but truly there would have to be a policy change on how our civilian positions are treated in the budget cycle, because they are never a priority. And the chief has asked for civilianization on many occasions. He's presented his budget and asked for civilians to be considered a priority. That has not been done. So there's just a difference between what you're saying you'd like to accomplish and what the history of the city has been as far as our civilian positions are concerned.
No, I think that's a fair point, and I think we should look at it a little differently if we're looking at civilianizing a significant number of other positions. But certainly any which way, I don't see any way we can justify continuing to start up new classes and continuing hiring. It's absolutely unsustainable. Civilianizing or not, I think there's no way we can survive this, certainly in the coming couple of years. Other question I have is, how are we doing in terms of filling this gap? Do we actually think that we can fill the entire gap through negotiations with the PPL, or are we going to come up significantly short? And if so, we have the choice of furloughs versus new hires, and where do we go with that?
Paul, let me ask, we can't get into that because it just takes the rug from under his feet and when he gets into those negotiations.
I will be reporting on the progress being made at tomorrow's ERC meeting.
And if we're looking to attrit out more people, how many people are going to drop due to the drop program this year and next year combined?
Well,
can we guess?
Yeah, well, this year we have 47 people who have to go. And on average, they're leaving on average around 3.5, 4 years. So we have 47 people who have reached the 5-year mark who have to go. Next year, we'll have 101 people who will have met the 5-year mark who will have to go. However, just one point to your question, to your comment about the fact that we have no choice but to attrit out more officers. I think, and because it makes fiscal sense, I think one thing that we have to consider is the investment that you've made over the long run in these police officers and reaching the level that we've reached so far. And that investment, and the fact that that investment has paid off in great dividends. And those dividends are lives that have been saved because the police officers are out there in force. Our ability to have flexibility to put police officers where the crime is. The reductions in crime have to be considered when you're talking about whether or not it's economically feasible to continue to maintain the level of the police force. And that would be the message that I know this chief wants to portray and that Chief Bratton would want to say to you.
Yeah, certainly that's true. Although, again, folks that are doing jobs that could be done by civilians, I don't think have generated any significant level of additional safety. They're not out on the streets doing something that civilians couldn't do.
Well, just one point to that is, and this will be my last point, is that if we go down that civilianization road and we don't have the money to fill those civilian jobs, then you're just going to, the number of deployable officers is just going to be worse, because we will still have to get those duties done, and we'll still need police officers to do it. So if you stop the hiring now, we will not be able to just put those police officers back out there, because we don't have the funding to backfill those civilian jobs.
All right, so obviously we would have to deal with that intelligently. I don't think that would be too difficult. I have one question, and I guess I'll put it out there. Maybe this is something that would actually be discussed in the negotiations. I don't know if there would be any possibility to put a higher level of furlough, or furlough only the folks that are doing the desk jobs and are doing the jobs because they're injured and can't be out in the field. Is there a way to consider that as a separate category? Because certainly they would be of less value to us than the folks out on the field. Not that they're not of significant value, but I think it would be less problematic to see furloughs in those areas.
We'll research that and then report back at tomorrow's meeting.
Just at first blush, Councilman, I think it'd be an equity issue within the department. Officers go where they're assigned by the department, and whether that's in the field or an administrative job, they'd be then financially impacted because of the department's decision to deploy them in one position versus another.
Right. I recognize that it's somewhat iffy, but I'd like to have us look into it.
There are legal challenges, of course, too, because some of the folks who are at desk jobs are because of disability, so they may feel that they're experiencing some level of disproportionate share as a result of their disability. So we have to be careful about that, too.
That could be possible. Thank you.
Dennis, you had a question?
Thank you. Back to the issue of civilians, and you mentioned 500 eligible to retire, and it was stated that 47 have to go the end of this year, next year 101. And if we look at the economy, which is not doing very well, positions for officers who retire, detectives who retire, are not there, which would then connect with fewer people retiring that are not on drop. If on drop, you've got to go. So the folks that are not on drop, that decide to stay, 30, 31, 32, 33, and no opportunities for outside employment, if we look at those numbers and we're calculating this out, we could take some of those dollars and we could set a policy that Mr. Paul Koretz talked about, civilianization, since the department's been asking for so long. Take some of those dollars and hire. You can probably hire 2.5 civilians for every officer, and there's not a training cost of $100,000. We've never looked at that to say, take some of those training dollars, take some of those dollars, and hire civilians, since you're not going to have that flood of department personnel leaving. We know they're not going. The numbers show they're not going. And if the economy doesn't improve for a year, that gives us one more year. We can fill those spots and still save money. You can reduce the training costs because there's not $100,000, and the salary and benefits are not the same category as police officers. Why haven't we explored that to say we can take care of two things at one time and reduce the number at the 40, maybe 20, maybe 10. Right now we're 50 over. Next month we may be 70 over because they're not retiring as we know, as they've done in the past. And whether this contract comes about next month or next week, there's still no opportunities for people who are retiring. Why don't we look at that opportunity and save some money and redeploy those dollars? We oftentimes switch dollars from one pot to another. Why can't we do it in this matter? It seems like we're tending to stay away from the civilian issue, and we're totally supportive of the police issue. And if we look at the numbers, long-term IOD and permanent, you're looking at about 8,800, 9,000 officers at that. Fill those positions with the dollars. We say we have the money. Chief?
Right now, we're not saving any money.
Well, you're still hiring, though.
We are avoiding increasing our deficit.
No, but you're still hiring. You're still hiring 40 a month.
We are.
So why don't you take the money for the 40 a month and stop the hiring after this October class, fill some of those civilian positions, because you're already over the 10,000 number according to the statistics that you have. And we know the retirements are going to be reducing and not increasing. And we're not going to have 500 people retiring.
We do know, because this council did approve us to hire to attrition this year.
And we're over attrition.
We do know that we're 42 over at this point in the fiscal year.
And then what are we going to be next month?
We may still be around 42 over next month, too, if we're still hiring, which we hope to do.
Okay.
But in December, as I stated, we will have attrition, and we won't be hiring for that month.
We're not sure of that, though.
We are sure that we won't be hiring for December.
Okay, what about January?
We are sure that we're going to have attrition, because we do have some attrition every month.
Well, you have some, but you don't have the number that you had in the past.
We don't know how much. And another big point of our attrition is right after the first of the year, February-ish, where people go retire and they can get their COLA from the retirement system. I don't understand it all, but that's another big point where we have a big number.
And the COLA's been coming in at 0. So they're not going to retire for that COLA.
Well, no, not for the COLA for the contract. It would be the COLA for the retirement system.
Right.
So that's another point where we have large numbers of people retiring.
And that
so we're really not sure whether or not we are so far over our attrition yet.
Well, we're already over 40.
We are for this moment.
Okay, and then next month we're over another 40. Right. In other words, we're giving ourselves a great cushion, but we're neglecting the aspect of civilian hiring. And we're saying we want to safeguard this sacred police officer category and neglecting the other category when we know we're already over.
Yeah, I think what she's getting at is that we're 42 over this month. We may be 42 over next month, but we anticipate being pretty close to flat the following month because of there won't be a class going in December. So we start the new year, then the new calendar year, basically even, or at least as close as we can project to even.
And meantime, we could hire some civilians in that category, and we could start bolstering that and freeing up some of those dollars that we have. We could. How many civilians can we hire for a police officer's salary?
I think the point that I just want to make sure you understand is that we don't have the money in our account and we can save it and now move it to the civilian account. We are in deficit $135 million as we sit here today.
And you're still going to hire police officers?
Well,
that makes no sense.
We have a line item in our account, and this council approved us hiring to attrition.
Okay,
and
now
we saw the wisdom in that, and we are hiring to attrition.
And then we come up with a new policy because we're already in deficit. We say we're going to stop hiring, period.
You can stop hiring, but we will not have money to move over to our civilian side.
Okay, so we stop hiring, and now you clear up your budget by $10 million?
Our deficit will go down $9 million.
$9 million.
That's right.
So we save $9 million.
Our deficit will go down $9 million.
So if we're so concerned about trying to fill this gap, I don't understand why we're talking furloughs or some other opportunities when we should say, let's stop the hiring, let's get the space that we need as far as the budget, and if we do have some money and retirement doesn't go like we anticipate, maybe we'll hire some civilians. I just can't understand the logic behind, you know you're in a deficit and you still insist on hiring officers, and the proposition of furloughing officers, which again makes no sense to furlough any officers. So what if we said we're going to stop after the October class, and we're going to analyze it in December or January, and we'll go from there? I mean, you got how many lined up to go in the academy? Already passed the test. 1,000, 1,500?
How many do you have?
We have hundreds of people who are lined up that are going to be eligible for hire over this fiscal year.
So it's not a matter of going out and recruiting them. They've already been recruited through the testing process.
We continue to recruit because, of course, we have our consent decree obligations also. So we need our classes to reflect our community. So we continue to recruit. But, yes, we do have hundreds of people in the system.
How many in the holding pattern right now we could admit to the academy for training?
How many do we have?
How many thousands?
Gloria, how many do we have on the CERT right now for hire? 172 on CERT for hire that have already passed all the testing.
And then after that, how many hundreds more in different stages?
We have thousands.
Okay. So we're still paying people to go out and recruit while we have thousands waiting in the pool.
Well, you have to understand, we only hire one out of about every 12 people that go through our testing process. Only one of them makes it through the process. So we have to test.
Well, Mr. Parks and I made it, didn't we?
In Dennis's class, it was not that high.
The bar was a lot lower back then.
Well, with you, Mr. Smith, there was no bar. They just took you in. So if we're struggling for the dollars, what we need to analyze is stop the hiring, stop the furlough discussion, close the debate, and let's analyze it when we get down and save some more money. I think we have an ERC tomorrow and talk about more of this issue, how we're going to come up with this gap. Police officers, and I've spoken to a lot of them, along with my colleagues, they're fearful of the furlough. They're fearful of all the rumors. We need to get that settled. But I think when we're still talking about hiring, we're doing a disservice to everybody. And we already have, when we said, over 1,100 that are collecting a paycheck, have a badge and a gun, and they're not performing field duties. That's a whole lot of people.
Yeah, that piece has been stable. We've actually reduced that from where it used to be, and that's kind of the nature of the beast. We, in 2006, put in an essential duty special order, which then put a ceiling on that piece so that we do bridge them off. So we took a stand at the point we could take a stand. As we move forward, that number will continue to reduce. On the temporary light-duty people, as you well know, that's the nature of the beast. Every night we have people hurt to some degree, and we just have to support and deal with that.
And I want to acknowledge the department for coming, because for years it just happened, you know, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. But, I mean, we've been here for a couple hours now, and I'm ready to make a motion if the colleagues are ready for a motion on this matter, unless we're...
No.
Just for 1 minute.
Okay.
Let us give some instruction, and then we'll come back.
Then motion. Okay.
Mr. Smith, you had one other question?
I just had one question. You're talking about the number of people that are going out on drop. How many of the 117 that have already retired were on that 5-year required drop time?
We're averaging about 10 a month.
Sorry, what was that?
We're averaging about 10 a month.
So about 40 of the 117 then were already hitting the drop number anyway?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Okay. Then let me just, there were several reportbacks requested by Mr. Rosenthal. Let me just go through them real quickly with some clarification. He asked for a report back on the 65 officers that, if I understand it, are able-bodied officers filling civilian positions. We'd like to make sure that that reflects on positions that they're filling, authorized civilian positions, and how many of those 65 might be positions that were created outside of the budget process. Okay. On the 18 at LAX, he has to report back on that we also asked, in that clarity of those positions, that we get an understanding of what were the original assignments versus what are the current assignments of these 18 officers. Of the 518 officers that are on permanent restricted duty, what's important there is that we get some clarity as to how many of the positions that are being filled that are authorized positions in the department's TO that basically that they're filling, otherwise other able-bodied officers would have to fill them. And so if we can get that included in those 3 report backs, and then on the 634 for temporary, he asked for report back on that, and we can get some idea of what positions they cover. The issue, covered all that. Okay, Mr. Zine, you had a motion, then I have a motion and some instructions too.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That the police department be instructed to cease hiring after the October class, and that it be evaluated on a monthly basis, and when it drops below the 10,000 number, we reevaluate. Until that time, after the October class, we stop the hiring, we eliminate the recruitment effort, which will save money, we eliminate and we see what we can do to fill civilian positions in the department that are filled by the sworn personnel.
Okay.
That'd be the motion.
Okay. All right. Let me just ask, just in a sense of that motion, I would also ask that with that in the mid-January that we bring back a joint public safety and Budget and Finance Committee to discuss any potential hiring for the rest of that fiscal year.
And recruitment.
And recruitment. So the issue, and so your motion stops everything. We'd like to have that meeting in mid-January to talk about what would be the final assessment for that fiscal year.
And Mr. Chair, and the reason why we discuss recruitment is there are personnel from the police department personnel from Personnel Department that are actively recruiting, and we've got thousands of people in the pool waiting. It makes no sense to continue the expenditure when we already have a reserve pool of people, and our attrition rate is not what we thought it would be.
Okay. And then also I'd like to add another instruction is that as part of the 13A and B that we sent to this committee, that we instruct the CAO and the city attorney to reconfigure the emergency resolution to include the information regarding sworn furloughs, but that it specifically states that that instruction will not be implemented without a specific vote of the city council. Okay. That would be a second motion, yes.
Okay, that's a second one. Okay. On the first one, on the stopping the hiring in November, if we don't have a hiring class in November,
yes,
more or less what number will we be at?
That's why we're going to monitor it month to month.
We'll be right around 99, 30, 40-ish.
So, and the motion also states to come back and report on a month-to-month basis. Would you be coming to report to Public Safety Committee, to Budget and Finance, to a joint?
Mr. Smith, I suggest we have the joint monthly committee to resolve it until it's resolved.
The next meeting will be somewhere in January after we're back from recess.
Okay.
Joint Budget, Finance, and Public Safety.
And if we have those month-to-month report backs to Joint Committee of Budget and Finance and Public Safety and where we are with hiring, if, say, we dip significantly or we dip at a number we're not comfortable with, how much time do you need lead time to go out and start recruiting again?
See, that's a very good question. Thank you for asking it. And I don't know if Gloria wants to join us at the table, too, to talk about the personnel side, but there's a 7-step process to the hiring process for police officers. Gloria has a staff of background investigators. If you stop hiring and we just stop the recruitment process,
the issue is how long do you, the longer you stop, the harder it is to get things going again. As Councilman Zine said, there are many, many people in this process. Not all of those individuals have completed the process. Not all of those individuals will ever complete the process or take each test part. Some may pass test parts, others may not. But if we were to discontinue hiring for several months, for example, their scores would expire in the various test parts, and we would have to, again, retest these individuals. If you skip one class, obviously that's not as significant. In addition to that, I would say that you would still want to have some recruitment efforts continued by the LAPD. Should you decide to stop hiring for a short while, because you want those individuals to continue to pursue and stay with LAPD, should we, for example, hire the following month or what have you. So it's really,
just for
or
example,
they go to the sheriffs or someone else.
last year we hired 808 people total, attrition and net gain. It took us 13,358 people processing through our system to net that 808 candidates.
Hypothetically, let's say we stop and we don't recruit for November. We come back January and we say, you know what, let's kick this up again. We want to get another class. How much trouble would it be, logistically speaking, to then go back and say, hey, we need another 50 officers and we want to start recruiting again? I mean, do you stop and seize operations and advertisement and trainers and teachers? And I mean, logistically, what does this mean for you?
Well, again, Gloria is correct when she says it depends on how long you stop. Of course, we have classes going through. If we stop for too long, then possibly some of those trainers in the academy, some of those recruiters would be reassigned elsewhere and not continue to do those duties if they're not needed, if you stop for too long. So what we would recommend is that we have recommended, is that we not stop completely the hiring process, because we will lose candidates, and it takes us a lot of candidates to net a class.
Yeah, and I see what you're getting at, Mr. Zine, but I'm of the opinion that I would like to, I mean, there's different points of view on what we should do right now, given the huge budget deficit we have, and I'm of the classification that I think we need to remain at the levels that we are and hope times get better and have those officers available to us as opposed to scaling back and then have to, if we ever could, start up a hiring program again. And I'm just concerned that if we stop now in November, I'm asking the question to see how easy it is to start up again, and if we need to. Because, I mean, the intent, it sounded like you mentioned, Mr. Zine, was that to try to hover around that 10,000 level. I'm just not sure that if we completely stop, we'd be able to kick in and get that. And there's, like it was mentioned, there's nothing magical about 10,000, but if we're saying let's hover around 10,000, more or less, how do we completely stop and then build up to that if we have to later on?
Well, the question is, how many are waiting in the pool currently? You said 170?
172 are currently on the certification list, but again, if we were to stop hiring, those 172 would not be available necessarily because their scores would expire. They would have to retest on the various test parts.
So, how many are in the academy now? Different phases between the three academies?
About 340-ish.
340 in the academy. Are those included in the numbers that we're using?
Yes.
The 340 current recruits?
They're in the academy right now.
Okay, and those are included in the number that you're talking, 40 over our 10,000? In other words, when they enter the academy, they're counted on the payroll, they're counted as police officers?
They're counted as, yes.
Okay.
As deployed, yes.
And if you look at the ones that are already ready, if you send them a letter tomorrow, they could report Monday. They've already been through the testing. You could have those folks enter the academy on Monday since everything's been completed, correct? The 170?
Of the 170.
72?
Right, as of today.
As of today. What I'm saying is behind those folks, how many thousands have completed their written, their oral, their physical, or in the other pool, they're in backgrounds right now? How many thousands are in those categories? That's what I'm talking about, is we have such a reservoir of people that are waiting to go to the next step, and we're still hiring, we're still recruiting, giving them false hopes when we're not going to hire more than 30 if we do 30. That's what I'm saying. You've got to have 2,000 or 3,000 that have passed tests.
My example was that to hire 800 last year, we had to recruit 13,000.
Right.
So, in order to fill our classes with and we have a consent decree also. We have some consent decree obligations, and we want our classes to reflect our community. We want women in those classes.
We're not disputing that.
So what I'm saying is that it takes a lot of recruiting to get the proper mix of our classes.
But how many do you have in the reservoir waiting to enter the pool, to enter the academy?
We do have several thousand that are in the process. Again, but the point is it really depends on how long you delay the process. If you delay the process and not hire for several months, then those individuals, again, are not, they're not.
I understand that. If we delay it 1 month at a time and we decide we've dropped significantly low,
we will have to continue. If we are going to make the decision that we're going to hire on a monthly basis, we're at the very last moment that we're just going to go ahead and decide we're going to hire, then personnel department and the mentors of LAPD will have to continue to stay in place to continue to process those individuals in order for them to be ready should you decide to go ahead and hire those individuals.
Yeah. And one thing,
so for example, we have to keep doing the backgrounds, we have to keep doing the medicals, and we have to keep doing the tests.
And we'll do that on a monthly basis. That's what I'm saying.
Well, one thing you do have a built-in delay in December. You're not going to hire in December.
Right.
But you are going to trit out some officers.
We will trit out some, but I'd say that the trit's going to be very low.
I would recommend that is the point where we have an opportunity to look at how many we've hired, how many we've tritted out. We'll have extra attrition in December that we won't be addressing with hiring, and see where we are at that point.
And then you say stop at that point?
Well, if we not stop, but assess where we are.
It's built in.
If the goal is to maintain attrition.
Yeah, I would. For me, it's We haven't finished negotiations. We don't know what the numbers look like. To me, this is premature. I'd rather reduce the class of November, because we already higher than we expected. Reduce it by a little, let's say 15 officers. It's not much, but we're like recognizing that we're above, so why continue higher up here? Let's reduce the number by 15, 20 officers. But to me, I don't feel comfortable acting on this right now until negotiations and the big picture isn't happening. We almost have a hiatus in December to look at this again and come back and have a sense of, well, should we cut this or not? I haven't heard I haven't been briefed by our negotiation team as to how those talks are going, what the numbers look like, what are they looking to cut. This, for me, is one piece. This, for me, is one piece of all the other options that we look at. I may be to stop hiring, but right now, I think to say we're going to stop hiring without looking at the big pie, the big picture, I'm not comfortable doing that. Just as I wanted to also clarify the second piece.
There's the man right there who knows it. Miguel.
Chairman, can we go in the back and get briefed real quick so we can make an educated vote here?
We have the ERC team right there.
Yeah.
And we have a meeting tomorrow morning with the ERC.
Tomorrow morning, a lot may happen tomorrow morning. I'd rather have the full council get briefed on this as a whole.
The issue is that...
Or we could vote on it and have different
one
opinions.
of these, this whole issue is going to council. It's not the final issue today, but I think we're going to hopefully come to some conclusion to represent either a unanimous or a partial vote that goes to council. And so I think what we're trying to do is also get the Budget and Finance meeting before dark. But the thing is, I think we have, certainly it's going to be unclear. That's why I think when Dennis made the motion, I added the issue of coming back in January to make some assessment based on where we are at that time. So we have a joint committee meeting. That was the whole purpose of that. That at worst that could happen if we decide to hire in January, that January the third class could be pushed towards the end of the month if you tend to keep hiring for the fiscal year. If the numbers don't come out well in January, we assess and we say don't hire January or February, then again, that's something that's got to be brought to the council so that we can judge it from the larger body. And I think it's important that we have the wording for the emergency resolution in place. So in fact, and in case we have to invoke it, it's already available. But again, we don't put it in place until the council votes on it. So
what do you mean by put it in place until the council votes?
They have to write it up. It has to be altered from what was recommended out of the CLA or the CAO's report that dealt with at the Budget Committee. So we're saying what they proposed is going to be different than because of the current situation. So the direction is to write it as it relates to the current situation, but it doesn't get implemented until the council votes on it.
Okay, so all we would be doing here on the furlough issue is to direct CLA, CAO to draft it. We're not saying we agree with it or not. We're just saying draft it.
Well, the thing is, we instructed them to draft a new resolution language that was part of 13A or B, I can't remember which one, but the new emergency declaration, but that in drafting that it wouldn't be implemented until the council approved it. But we thought it would be important to have the language created at this time so that if and when it were available and we needed to, we could bring that before council.
Okay. But when we say until council approves it, we vote on something in committee, it's not implemented anytime until council.
Create it. No. We're just asking to create the language of the emergency resolution and to have that available. We're not approving the language because we haven't seen it. Okay. We're asking to write it and that the council will have to approve that emergency language before it's implemented. Yes.
May I ask a clarifying question on the motion? In practical terms, I understood the motion to read that the department should cease hiring up until the point that they get below 10,000 officers. Is that what the motion read?
Say that again.
Up until the point that you get below 10,000?
No.
Below attrition, right?
Well, what I'm saying is we're already 40 over. And next month, if we're another 40 over, that's going to be 80 over the 10,000. What we're saying is to stop at the point of November or where we have no class in December and giving room to reevaluate on a monthly basis if we do drop significantly lower, but say 10 people retire. Now you're 30 over.
Got it.
Yeah. The thing that I qualified Dennis's motion was, he said to stop the hiring, understanding that November's upon us and December's is not going to have any hiring. I inserted January as a period of time that both committees can come back and reassess all hiring between now and June 30th. And so that would basically just modify it somewhat, that we can have a checkpoint and an assessment, negotiations, retirements, all that could be assessed in January before we hired another class.
And as far as the recruitment effort goes, maybe they could scale back. How many people do you have assigned to recruitment?
We have been scaling back since we changed the hiring program. As a result, last year we were in an expansion mode. This year we are hiring for attrition. So we have cut back the staff.
How many do you have? How many staff assigned to recruitment?
We have 3 analysts that are currently working in recruitment.
That's it?
Yes.
And what about police department?
We have 42 people assigned to recruitment.
42 people, police officers. That's another 42 officers that could be deployed for police activities. We don't need 42 officers in recruitment. If we're going to scale back, we need to scale back. I'm not saying eliminate it.
They're not just doing recruitment. Some of them are assigned to recruitment, and others are assigned to processing the applicants, reviewing the file.
Well, I thought that was done by civilians.
Yeah.
We bring civilians in for that, for backgrounds.
No, this would not be for backgrounds. This would be, can you talk about?
How many officers do we have on the street? Maybe 20 or 30? It seems like everybody's doing other than what we thought they would be doing, protecting the people of Los Angeles. It's unbelievable. Gee, Commander.
Okay. Commander Jim Kanzer, Personnel Group. We have 17 officers who are recruitment officers. We have about 8 or 9 who are in hiring and evaluation section that have to do review the background packages submitted by Personnel Department, review them, make sure everything's there post requires, and then they bring those packages to me or Captain Mariani for hire. So not all 42 are officers. There's some civilians involved in that too.
So that's like 24 people.
Excuse me?
24, 25 people.
That are sworn.
Okay.
The rest are civilians, but they're all involved in the recruitment process and the hiring process.
Okay, I thought they were all sworn personnel.
Mr. Reeves, are you through? Because Mr. Corretz, and then we close it down, and we have one card left.
Okay, I'll go to Ms. Corretz, and I have some final comment afterwards.
Okay, I just have one point and one question, which is, we're talking about being nervous that we're doing this a little prematurely. I would actually say the opposite, that I think this is already unsustainable this year. But my question is, what are we anticipating the shortfall to be next year? What percentage of that is our policing function, and how much more difficulty are we going to have maintaining 10,000 officers next year?
Well, we're anticipating next year's shortfall to be at least as high as this year's, which is over $400 million. I'm not prepared to break it down in terms of what percentage of it is from the police department. Certainly with all the cuts that we're making now or attempting to make, many of the solutions that have been brought before this council are one-time solutions. So we're going to continue having a problem next year and have to make up for the continued loss in revenue, and of course our huge pension obligation that's coming next year, as well as for making up the whatever things were one-time only for this year. So next year, unfortunately, doesn't look much better.
Now, I think I've read numbers as high as $1 billion for next year. How are we only $400 million? Is that just a pie-in-the-sky estimate by someone, or is that a realistic possibility?
When we put the budget before this council back in April, May, we were looking at $1 billion shortfall. That was based on significant losses in both pensions and lacers, of roughly about 25%. and that was prior to any changes in their funding policies as far as corridor and smoothing. Since that time, both boards have actually made some changes. Their losses were only about 20%, unfortunately. As Miguel mentioned, we're in the $400 to $500 million range at this point, though there are a number of one-time solutions that are on the table. The more that we can have ongoing, basically that deficit will come down.
So we think next year's deficit will be advantaged by some of the things we've done this year, so it's more likely to be in the $400 or so million range. Right. Thank you.
Mr. Rezar.
Thank you. I was just going to, again, state that, if our goal is to hover around 10,000 and we're over in recruiting by about 42, that I'd rather go the route of decreasing the number of recruits so that we stay around that goal, but completely shutting down for 2 months and coming back and reassessing. We have built-in assessments either way. We could assess it every month. I sense some difficulty in shutting down for November, and I'd rather continue going in that direction unless there's something else.
No, I think from the department standpoint, we would be supportive of that, because I think if you look at our average for the year, it's based on 13 deployment periods of hiring and new classes in other years. It's going to be 12 this year, so we can anticipate being pretty much flat at the end of the year. We're not going to have that 42 additional officers.
So it's going to be a bigger ramp up, right? As opposed to going from 0 to 40 miles per hour, you're just going to have to, it's like higher acceleration.
It's a machine.
Completely shut down, rather than take a wait-and-see approach, do November, shut down December, we're already shutting down December, and then reassess it. I think that's a better route, but we have a difference of opinion, and let's voice vote, please.
All right. Let me ask, we have one comment card, and then we're going to go to a vote on the issues. Mr. McQuiston?
Jim McQuiston. Listening to the comments here, I did want to put in some things. The Recreation and Parks and the library have a statutory requirement in the charter for funds, and they are above that statutory requirement right now. I've asked them personally about that. So they're not going to be in the position where they have to close libraries because of the budget deficit. The other thing I want to say is we have a plan that says we're supposed to be putting aside a rainy day fund, and we just put that in, I think, this year or last year. And next year, we're going to run at least, according to the CAO, $800 million. He just put that out as a deficit. That's bigger than this year. But I want to say something about the statutory deficit. Statutory deficit is because of a statute. That is $600 million this year. Next year, it'll be $27 million more. That means we have to lay off every year 500 more people. That's if they're policemen. If they're not policemen, we'll have to lay off even more than that. We have to do something about this statutory deficit. That's income. And we can. And the mayor has the key to that. We have to get the mayor off the dime and getting that income. We could get up to $1.8 billion in our treasury almost immediately. Think of what that would do to our treasury.
Thank you very much. Let me, first of all, we gave 4 instructions for report back, and we'd asked for those report backs to be at the Joint Committee in January so that we can know what the impact on the 65, the 18, the 518, and the 634. Also, and we'd like to also, what additional instruction, we're going to receive and file Ms. Hahn's motion because I think it was basically trumped by what Mr. Zine has on the table now. So we'll receive and file her motion relatively to instructing the police department to suspend spending any future or sending any future letters out to new officer hiring. So we'll receive that and file. Okay, if we could have a voice vote on recommendation number 1 would be to, and this is referring to items 13A and B that was sent back to this committee. Mr. Zine moved, and it was seconded by Mr. Smith, that we instruct the department and personnel department to cease hiring after the October 2009 class. And so we can have Mr. Reyes, your vote on that
I think
issue.
we have to vote by different committees, don't we?
Well,
Clerk?
Okay. Do we have to do?
Do we have to do, the committees have to vote separately? Yeah.
Okay, let's go with budget and finance. Let's see, Mr. Koretz?
Aye.
Mr. Weezer?
No.
Mr. Rosenthal?
I'm sorry.
We're going to vote on the issue, Mr. Zine's.
Yeah, I'm with Mr. Zine on
Okay,
that, yes.
and then I'm a yes, so that's 4-1. Okay.
And me.
4-1.
Okay, that's right. That's right. You got two hats on, okay. All right.
Me too.
Twice.
Yes, you get to do twice, okay, all right. Okay, now, Mr. Smith, you want to call the roll?
I'm sorry. Mr. Smith, I didn't get your vote on that.
Yes.
For budget and finance.
Yes.
4-1. I'm always a minority.
Okay.
And
then for the Public Safety Committee, Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Zine?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Mr. Curtis?
Yes.
Mr. Smith, yes. And Mr. That's all.
Okay. The next item, recommendation was Mr. Zine's motion, I believe seconded by Mr. Smith, that elimination of recruitment efforts.
I thought that's what we...
Pardon?
We just voted on that, didn't we?
No, we voted
that's the
on
second piece of
The hiring.
the hiring,
Stop.
ceasing the hiring.
Okay.
So you had a second part of eliminating the recruitment efforts within the personnel and police department. And so we go with budget and finance, and we'd ask Mr. Koretz,
Yes.
Mr. Weezer.
Wait, I missed the two votes. The first one was on what now?
The first vote, the only vote we've had is to instruct a ceased hiring after the October 2009
Okay.
class.
And this is, and this
This
vote?
is eliminating the recruitment efforts within personnel department and the police department. It was his second part of his motion.
In other words, don't go out recruiting since
Stop.
we have a reserve
Not eliminate,
pool.
stop recruiting.
Stop recruiting.
Stop recruiting.
Since we already have people in the pool.
Yeah, okay. No.
Okay. Mr. Kretz, yes.
Yes.
Mr. Weezer, no. Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Parks, yes. Okay, Mr. Smith, will you do your roll call?
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Zine?
Yes.
Cardenas?
Yes.
Smith, yes.
Okay, next we go to the instruction that this committee meets in mid-January 2010 to assess future hiring for the LA Police Department. Mr. Koretz?
Yes.
Mr. Weezer?
Yes.
Mr. Rosenthal?
Yes.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, so we have that. And then public safety.
Mr. Reyes?
Yes.
Mr. Zine?
Yes.
Mr. Cardenas?
Yes.
Mr. Smith, yes.
Okay. Final recommendation is that the issue of the emergency resolution, direction of the CAO and the city attorney to create a new resolution that addresses furloughs for LAPD officers, but that this new resolution not be acted upon until a vote of the council. Mr. Koretz.
No.
Okay. Mr. Weezer.
It's ministerial, correct, Mr. Parks?
Yeah, it's
It's ministerial.
a matter of
I
just
mean, you could
having
give him
them-
that direction as chair of the committee
That's
anyway,
all it
so,
is.
yeah, yes.
Okay. Mr. Rosenthal.
Wait a minute, better go back to that. What are you saying about furloughs?
All we're saying is create the document, and the document is not approved until the council votes on it.
Yeah,
But-
no, I'm against furloughs, period.
Okay.
So, no.
Okay, well, this is going to give the wrong message. I thought since we just giving direction and tell him to come back with a document without agreeing with it
That's
or not.
exactly what we're asking.
But if we have a difference of a vote, I think it's going to give a wrong message, so I would change my vote to a no then.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Mr. Smith.
Reluctant, yes.
Okay. A yes. So that's 3-2 from Budget and Finance. Mr. Smith, you call the roll.
Okay. Ready?
It's just direction.
Okay. Mr. Reyes?
Say no.
No.
No. Mr. Cardenas?
Yes. No way.
Smith, yes.
Okay. So what do we have? 2-2 on public safety and 3-2 on the Budget and Finance. So we'll move this item and also the instruction that we received and file the Hans Zine motion that was also before the committee. So that would conclude the deliberation for the items 2 and 3 of the joint committee. We'll adjourn that committee, and then we'll reconvene in the in the Budget and Finance Committee.
Point of clarification. On your vote to cease the hiring,
Yes.
you voted that we would come back mid-January to review it.
That's right.
So I just want you to make sure you understand that the impact of that would be that we would not have the viability to be able to hire another class until February, because we will miss the January date.
Our goal is to have the meeting early enough in January that your January 3rd class would be impacted, but that we'd have a meeting well in advance of you being able to make a decision. If the committee chooses to make that decision, you'd be able to make it before January's out. So it's basically moving your January 3rd class at worst to the end of the month in the sense, or could be eliminated. Okay?
Okay, and on my committee, Mr. Reyes wishes to switch his vote on which item? On the furlough issue to?
The opposite of what I said.
Yes. Okay, so that makes then both committees as a yes recommendation.
Okay? So we'll adjourn this meeting, and we'll go and we'll reconvene the special meeting of the city, I guess special meeting of the Budget and Finance. Is that right?
The regular meeting.
Regular meeting.
The regular meeting.
Regular meeting, okay. Let's get that straight.
The 4 o'clock meeting.
Yeah. Thank you very much. You cover everything?
And that's exactly what it is, and it's not correct. It isn't either.
Will be in the regular meeting. The joint meeting. Probably not. Let me see how we're going here, because we're going to lose them. Going to convene the regular meeting, and we have a full committee, Mr. Koretz, Mr. Rezar, Mr. Rosenthal, Mr. Smith, myself, Bernard Parks, as chair. Let me go through a couple of items that we can dispose of, hopefully very quickly. Let's see. On item number 6, on the DWP financial policies, we'd ask to continue that and request the CAO bring this back in 30 days with the inclusive of the CRA, the LA Lalawa, the harbor reports all into one document with an assessment by the CAO as it relates to their compliance with the city's financial policies, so that we did not want to deal with those individually. And all the reports are in, from my knowledge, looking at the CF numbers, other than LAWA. For some reason, we do not, or could not locate a report from LAWA. So we'll continue that for 30 days. Also, on the issue number 7, we requested by the city attorney to hold that for 30 days so that they can work through some issues before bringing it before the committee. Let's see, item 10 is a receive and file, because we've addressed that through RFP. Let's see.
Uh, 13, I think you had.
Yes, 13, if we so concurrence with the committee, that we approve that, but we ask the city attorney and the mayor's office to get together before this comes to council and address concerns brought to us from the city attorney's office. So that's the issue of dealing with the strategic partnership and the donations, that we can move that forward because there's funds that have been made available through grants for those positions. So if that's a concurrence on 13, we can move that with that direction.
I just had one question, if they can answer the one question. Who's the Southern California grant makers?
Can we have Mayor's Office representative here? Okay.
I mean,
Let me see.
that's where the money goes, and I never heard of them before, so. Who is Southern California Grant Makers? That's who's going to get the money? That'd be,
I am not individually familiar with that organization. I do believe that they are a nonprofit, but I am not.
I'm familiar with the group. It's a nonprofit organization. It's fairly well respected in the city. They provide technical assistance for community-based organizations looking to be more competitive in obtaining grants. I'm familiar with them with my work across the street.
okay, thank you. That's good enough, thanks.
Okay, and also on item number 8, if we can have that on consent. And I just asked on number 8 that the clerk get with the Department of Finance, and just to clarify within those RFPs what the current rate of the contingency fee rate would be on those RFPs going out. And then on number 9, that also the achievement reports, that we move that on consent, as this item is moving funds into the general fund, and they've had more than adequate advertising as we've directed. Number 10. Okay, if they're on the issue of number 11, I'm going to ask for consent on that. This is the outside council report.
Is the trial over on that one?
This was pulled back in council last Wednesday, and so my assumption is that they're asking for this money so that it merges together with our reconsideration of the case. That's my assumption, but it's something that this case was on Wednesday's agenda, but asked to be continued.
This was a Carol, Joe, Gavin.
Yeah.
Is this case over now? Just the money is the final money to, yes?
Yeah. Dolores Rivera of the CAO's office. No, this case is not over. I recall what happened before is the case there was a proposed settlement offer from the city attorney's office. What the CAO is, through the ACP Attorney Conflicts Panel, one of the named defendants was conflicted out. So this is a request to add more funding to the contract. The case at this point is getting ready to go to trial, and it was scheduled to be going in trial mid-September, but it's been postponed to October, I think toward the end of October.
Okay, so this merely brings the bill current?
Yes.
Okay.
We have consent on number 11. Also, number 14 is return of the arts fees, if we can move that on consent. So we'll move those items, and we'll still end up with one closed session item number 1. We can go to item 4 now and get our overview as it relates to the current budget.
Good afternoon again.
Excuse me, let me ask, any questions on the committee on number 5, or can we move that on consent? The controller's information.
Yeah, good.
There's several recommendations about the reserve fund and such.
She has some money here for an attorney for
We move number 5 on consent. Okay, now we go to number 4.
Okay. This is a very quick report as to where we're at as it relates to the operational plans. As you know, last week the City Council approved a new ERIP ordinance as well as a tentative agreement. That unfortunately started the clock for the 30 days. We're expected that the second reading of that ordinance will be on October 30th. The agreement, as you know, provides about $78 million worth of savings that we were able to work out with the coalition. I have sent a letter to all the Lacers unions asking for a ratification of the ordinance and agreement by the 23rd of October. And so many of them that will be participating will be asking their members to vote. We're currently reworking the operation agreements with the assumption that ERIP passes. As was stated earlier today, the challenge is that we have a $58 million gap that will have to be met among EAA and other non-coalition, non-civilian work groups. And so that impact will be citywide. PD would be affected, obviously, disproportionately. Those departments that have a higher number of EAA members will be impacted. And so we will be coming back with mitigation plans on how to address those layoffs at that time. But in addition to that, we're also working on contingency plans in the event that the ERIP ordinance is not ratified. And in that, if that is the case, we will have a much more significant deficit to contend with, mainly because of the delay in time and the savings that we were able to generate by working with the coalition. We anticipate that our shortfall would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $127 million if the ERIP plan is not ratified by the various bargaining units. This would result in a shorter period of time to address that problem, which would mean our options would be very limited. Our only real options, when you consider even implementing the operational plan, assuming ERIP, which as you know has 900 elimination of positions, as well as the continuation of furloughs among EAA positions, we would have to engage in additional curtailments. Our options are either increasing the number of furlough days among coalition members on top of the 26 days that they would have to take, an additional 17 days, bringing them close to 42 days of furloughs in a period of starting November till July. Or we would have to eliminate an additional 2,000 positions on top of the 900 positions that we've already identified, which would make it obviously very challenging. My office has done sort of a preliminary exercise to see how we would even begin to do that kind of work. Without just a back of the napkin kind of scenario, we were able to identify 1,000 positions that we would eliminate. That leaves still a gap of an additional 2,000. So the likelihood is that if the ERIP were to fail and not be ratified, we would have to do a combination of layoffs beyond the 900 positions that we've already identified, as well. So somewhere in the neighborhood of 2,000 altogether, and more than 26 furlough days that has been approved so far. So the impact to the city will be significant. Moreover, it provides, we would have to deal with the COLA deferral for next year, which, as you know, is $27 million. But the worst thing we could do is not be prepared in the event that the ERIP is not ratified. So I've instructed my office to work with the CLA and the mayor's office to establish those contingency plans so that the council can move as quickly as possible once we get word from the various bargaining units.
Colleagues, any questions of the CAO regarding our current budget status? Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Also, colleagues, we can move item 12 on consent. Let me ask, I've confused myself. What do we have left?
If you approve 12, then we just have the closed session left.
Okay, we just have closed session. Okay, we have, oh, sorry, Mr. McQuiston, you had a card in for number 4. Is Dr. Williams still in the room? Okay, we'll put his cards and file. Mr. Christian, you wanted to comment on number 4.
Yes, Jim, a question. Of course, the problem is next year, not this year. We're putting ourselves in a box with the coalition. I, of course, say that we have to do another alternative rather than starting to think about layoffs. We have to start thinking about getting rid of this statutory deficit, which involves some litigation, and giving us the money so we don't have to do any of this anymore, and cures our future problems as well. And so I am anxiously waiting for the mayor to act on this. It's a clear, from my experience, it's a clear path to success.
Okay, thank you very much. We're going to go in closed session, so we'll stay in the room here. If we can close the room down for closed session with that one item. But here, he used the money for... Okay, we're adjourning the regular meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee.
Hmm?